City for Ritchie City Council Workshop, Tuesday, June 4th, 2024.
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, if I could have roll, please.
Mayor John Eric Hoover.
Here.
Vice Mayor Linda Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilman David Mueller.
Here.
Councilwoman Cherokee Sampson. Here. Councilman Robert Hubbard.
Here.
City Attorney Nancy Meyer.
Here.
City Manager Matthew Koppler.
Thank you. First up, comments from the general public. I have no sign-ups. Anyone like to speak? Show hands. Bring it back. No? Yes?
Not over.
Okay. Next up, comments from the city manager. Pass it to Mr. Koppel for any comments.
Done this evening.
Moving right along, comments from the mayor and city council. I'll start with Councilman Hubbard on my right. Any comments?
Nope, not at the moment.
Councilman Mueller. Councilwoman Sampson.
Not
Vice
tonight.
Mayor Rodriguez.
No, thank you.
I as well have none. Moving on to council business. Item number 1, recreational open burning. I'll pass it to Mr. Koppel for introduction.
Good evening, and thank you. So the first item kind of stems from the standpoint that there's been a conversation, internal conversation between the fire chief and myself regarding open burning. And right now, if you could put up the definition or the ordinance, please. So currently in the city code, that particular section 26.5 burning is all we have in terms of guidance on open burning within the city. No garbage, refuse, trash, or other discarded matter, including trees or other vegetation, shall be burned in an open pit, incinerator, furnace, or other similar incinerating device or directly upon any real property within corporate limits of the city at any time. And so in speaking with the fire chief about this, he indicated that at some point in the past, the city attorney had put an opinion forward that says, well, this isn't recreational burning. This is other burning. This is open burning. Recreational burning is a different animal. Unfortunately, within the code, there isn't really anything that talks about recreational burning. That's the extent. And if you remember during our conversations about the RV park rules and regulations, we had that one section that talked about recreational burning. And I think at that time there was maybe a brief conversation about, well, where should recreational burning happen? Should it happen in a structure or a pit or whatever? And that was kind of really the impetus behind this conversation that started with the fire chief. So based upon the fact that there really was no regulations around recreational burning, the fire department, fire chief came up with an internal policy that he gave to his firefighters that when the call came that there was an open burning complaint, how they could go out and enforce what was recreational burning versus a regular open burning. Further add to this conversation here recently, you may have seen that the county has issued a no open burning notice. That's the word, notice. And for the county, of course, that's for unincorporated areas. It doesn't include the city. And we know, unfortunately, what can happen with these open burnings, recreational as well, if they're not well maintained and regulated. So for all of that kind of be in the background, what we put in your packet is something that I believe is kind of the base of what the fire chief had given to his firefighters when a call came in about a recreational burning, updated a little bit for the things that he felt needs to be in a ordinance if we were to proceed. So tonight, I guess, the questions that have to be answered is, one, do you want to allow recreational burning within the city and not just have it as a policy for the fire chief to decide? And if you do, is what the fire chief is putting out there is kind of the basis for that acceptable so we can put it together and bring it back to you as an ordinance.
If I could get clarification from you on when the county issues something of that nature, like an O-ban for the county, obviously we're part of the county. Is there anything that, if they issue like that, are all those things, they don't usurp our authority within our boundary?
The most recent one I can tell you, I've even read it. It does not include cities. It's just unincorporated county. So the city
Okay.
can then issue their own, and part of your code lets your city manager declare the emergency based on the fact that the state or county has declared the emergency, or if he finds the circumstances support just the emergency in this city, he can do that, and within, I think it's 2 business days, you guys have to ratify that by resolution.
So when there's no burn, it's specifically said unincorporated.
Yes.
Are they able to, just out of curiosity, are they able to put out a county-wide no burn that would preempt us from?
I've not researched that. I don't know the answer without looking for sure, but I would think there would have to be something that gives them the power to do that, depending on what the issue is. Different things could be addressed differently. But I don't. Matt knows. He raised.
Well,
did you
I
look at
don't
that?
know, but my position on that would
Yes.
be, because we do have our own charter and our home rule, that we have
The power to do
unless the state says otherwise, and I don't think the state grants that authority to do that. I mean,
Not on burning that I've seen.
right, exactly.
No, there's no preemption from the state.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Something like that, you would think that we would fall under the county for that. But evidently
No,
we're
because you
separate.
decided to be your own city.
Yeah,
You're
that's
on
good.
your own.
Good enough.
I guess I didn't know if Chief, if you wanted to add anything to my very brief and awkward introduction.
No, like I said, this came up because the verbiage does have some basic conflict in the verbiage. So we were just trying to either clarify that all the way across the board. Either you guys not want any burning in the city, which makes it really simple, or do you want to allow people to have campfires and RV sites to have campfires? And if so, I went through a pretty rigorous list of what the county currently has, and I actually added a little more to that to include some churches and ceremonial stuff. But we kind of have it all laid out either way for you guys to go in either direction that you want to go. We just need guidance on which way you want to go, and me and Mr. Koppler will pull the trigger on getting it done for you.
Well, we can do a quick roundtable to see, are you guys on board? Is there any objection to having recreational boarding, burning?
Nope, I don't think we should allow it.
No, but again, I think that the verbiage needs to be clear, and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, they have verbiage on their website that we could use.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that would keep us in guidelines with state and state regulations.
So it sounds like everybody agrees we should have recreational burning, right? Okay, so now we'll dig into what that means.
Advice to move forward, and then I'll put together a very, I already have it, a very
Yes.
detailed list. If you are going to burn in our city, this is what you're going to have to comply with. And then I'll get this to Mr. Koppler for you guys to put on the agenda and approve either way.
We'll look at what you found for FDEP, and I think you may have said this, but when I was looking through this, when the ban came out from the counties is quite detailed. I think you said you may have followed some of what they had, but we can look at theirs too and kind of bring a draft back to you guys.
Yeah, this particular one that I have laid out is even more detailed and stringent than what the county has. Like I said, I also include, because we have some churches that we have had some issues with in the past that do some burns, so I included things that would be approved for ceremonial burning, and the county does it, theirs is a little more vague, so I wanted it to be a little more, if we're going to burn in the city, I want to make sure that we have all our bases covered.
So going back to my initial question, based on this thing we have here, number one states no recreational opening burning will be permitted during state, county, city burn ban. So in this case, the county issues a burn ban, we automatically fall under it based on this, right? Is that
You'd still have, the city would still
No.
have to issue one.
We have to issue our own.
Yeah.
The county was very specific and unincorporated.
we have just says that no recreational open burning will be permitted during
So,
these things.
Let me say that again, what this is a set of guidelines. Thank you. Are you guys getting in my mind now? Is that what it is?
Matt can go home.
Set of guidelines the chief thinks are appropriate to put into a ordinance. The actual draft of the ordinance is going to be on someone else's shoulder, so it's going to look different than this, and we'll flesh out, those things that are strictly, city domain issues that we would do. So in that ordinance, we wouldn't be deferring to the county. So
I think I understand what Eric is saying. That number one, I thought the same thing.
Basically, they put in place.
Yeah, I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
So I understand where he's coming from. That's we're saying one thing, but I read this first number one as what he says.
That language will be different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
This
there-
is basically just a draft.
But it's just a set of guidelines.
Yep.
Will educate the final draft of the ordinance.
Did you want to spend some time to go through any of these, or just do that later?
Well, I would ask if there's anything in here that sticks out to you that you don't want to include or you think needs to be included. It would be helpful now because at some point you're going to have that list to us.
Right.
The more I have now, the better. The
can
less
draft it
time
now, the
later,
better off.
right? So we can get it
Here's
done.
some ideas that I have. It says no recreational burning allowed during a windy condition. Well, what is a windy condition? Is there a certain mile per hour that's a threshold that?
That's left to the discretion of the officer,
Okay.
because it's just like out in the Gulf, it may be windy here, but not windy there, so.
Also, are there any penalties defined if you're caught violating one? Is that
We-
to be determined?
We can refer it to forestry, so if you violate the burn ordinance that we have in place, we can forward it to forestry, and forestry can handle the
If there's-
follow-up and it keep us out of the litigation part of it. Unless we wanted to put a violation fee in there, then it would fall on code enforcement, I believe.
Yeah, most likely it would just be like civil application.
Yeah. We typically start off with warnings, just warn them and educate them and warn them and educate them. And if they're out there burning copper wire and stuff, then we just refer it to the state. We handle it, make them put it out, take the evidence, refer it to the State Division of Forestry, and let their officers follow up.
Right, and then item 7, when it talks about all commercial-made cooking devices, gas, charcoal, electric, grills, plates, smokers, and rolling containers must be a minimum of 10 feet from any approved structure. I don't think some of those cords have, on electric grills, have a 10-foot cord.
They should get an extension cord.
But it says commercial grade.
So that's not homeowners?
And that's an NFPA requirement.
Okay.
They don't want girls underneath porches, and even though a lot of people do put them there, but we're not out there policing that. But I can't not include it when it's an NFPA requirement.
So when it says commercial-made cooking devices,
That's somebody that you purchased.
That's something you went and purchased. You went to Lowe's or Home Depot and
And bought a
purchased
grill.
something.
right?
and brought it
So
home.
any grill,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Anything you
Storage
purchased, yeah.
And so, we have
Yes.
outdoor kitchens, and we
that are under.
Yeah, well, take it a step further than that. Inside our homes, we have stoves, right? So I guess why is there so much restriction on a grill, smoker? We actually,
There's a lot more
Pizza
reason.
oven.
What's that? Sorry.
People make pizza ovens and they build them themselves, and that's not well listed. How does that work?
That's the problem. There's homemade ones and not. So that's why the code. This was taken right out of NFPA word for word. What their recommendations
Yeah,
are.
some of
I
those
make
are-
up 10 feet. It came right out of the code.
They're built pretty good with bricks. I mean, they're pretty.
So people make some awesome ones, but that's why in the county we did the same thing. We're like, some people can't afford to go buy a commercial fire pit. So they're like, what's wrong with, putting some rocks on the ground and digging the area out? And there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's surrounded by something non-combustible, whether it be a dirt mound or rocks. So that's why we put a size limitation. When you look at number 10, there's a size limitation of 3 by 3. You know what I mean? So that's why that's written that way, to keep the sizes small and then allow the people that can't afford nice commercial fire pits or this or that to be able to build and create their own. I've seen some that were built there I think are nicer than some of the commercial ones, but the only difference is they're not UL rated and tested. But
right. Well, I guess my concern is that I've got to believe that most people that have a grill or outdoor kitchen or whatever is in an open roofed structure.
You would think that, but that's just not the case.
Well,
It's not, that's really, I see so many people who have their grill like right up underneath a tree or right up on their porch underneath a wooden.
Well, I agree.
Well, that's
That's
fine.
the problem,
But
yeah.
what I'm saying, this
How many
prohibit.
times has the police chief seen vinyl siding get melted?
Happens.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Just go to YouTube. You'll watch plenty of them.
Especially when
So,
they're doing
I mean,
turkeys.
you can leave any one of these particular ones you want out, but I would not alter any of them because they're straight cut and dry out of NFPA.
Yeah, I would think
Florida Fire Prevention Code.
I would think grills, smokers, a turkey fryer is a little different, obviously. You're not going to have that with a awning, but a grill has a cover that goes over that open flame. You're going to have it's covered up cooking device, similar to a stove in the house. I don't know why you would need that to be not underneath something, right?
Yeah, but that's from the national.
I get that.
Fire protection.
Fire
I get
It's
that.
not a decision I made. So if
Right.
you as council decide to leave those out and leave it up to our discretion, when they show up, you're still going to follow NFPA anyway. Recommendations, you know what I mean? So, but it's up to you guys. If you wanted to leave some of these out and leave it to discretion, it's up to you. I tried to make it as inclusive, all inclusive as could be, and cut and dry to where there was no gray areas like we have now. We have a lot of gray areas now.
I like the addition of all of the specific prohibited materials because it's not in our code, and I think that's really, I really like that.
It is. And listen, reality is most of the time it's not a problem. It doesn't really deal with barbecue grill. It's dealing with people that are having campfires in their backyard. Like I said, we don't go driving around with a tape measure measuring everybody that's got a barbecue grill. But it's when we get called there for an issue or a barbecue grill catches on fire and burns the house down. It is what it is.
I got a fire pit in my backyard.
Mhm.
That's about 3 feet. I got a metal ring this high. And then I got brick around
Brick
that.
around it. Yeah, that's perfect.
And I garden hose that.
Yeah. And then all we did, we had setback requirements just to make sure that we're not too close to the road, too close to your neighbor, or too close to woods.
Oh, it's out by the water.
So, yeah, see, that's perfect. And that's really the intention of what some of you weren't here when the original council had brought this idea up. That was the original intention. We live by the water and people have decent sized lots. Why can't they have a little campfire and enjoy nature?
It's been brought up numerous times,
Yeah.
so you're correct in addressing it, Gary.
You don't have some s'mores.
Safely.
So again, going back to
Number 7.
I get this coming out of NFP, and you're saying we can modify this or not?
I will not rewrite that, no. But you can take it out if you don't want number 7 to be in there. We take it out. But I'm not going to rewrite. I'm not going to go against what NFPA.
Oh, I see. So you're saying
it says
All or
It's
nothing.
all or nothing.
exactly.
Well, my concern is I go
And
out.
listen, I get it. I get it. I know what your concern is there, but I can't be put in the position to alter it and tweak it. So it's you either have to agree the way it's written and the way NFPA and the Florida Fire Prevention Code wanted it, out and leave it to the discretion of us as we come, because I can't be put in the position to alter that sentence. If you know what I mean.
Well, so I guess a question I have in regards to NFP, because if that's the case, there should be never any cause for a permitting of a outdoor kitchen. Am I right?
Never any cause for permitting
Because
Oh,
you
no.
could
It
not
goes
meet
against-
number 7.
Yeah.
But there's construction involved and piping involved and a lot more things on his end that are involved for the permitting process other than just the grill itself.
Right. But it's going to be within 10 feet of an improvement structure.
We have someone who would like to.
Sure. Mike?
Michael Ferez, 5045 Waterside Drive. The code, when we're building a structure, and he can contend to this, when you're building a fireplace, there's a spark arrestor at the top of it, which is where they pull the code. Disney pulls their code for having the fire screen over top of a fire pit. Is directly from the Florida Building Code on having what type of spark arresting you have to have in a fireplace. For outdoor kitchens, you can't do a cooking appliance in an outdoor kitchen without a hood, without an approved fire hood. And then that's got to be ducted properly to take that heat away from the thing. So I think my take on any of this was kind of like what we talked about in P&Z. Without getting the city to be overly critical and very specific and making the code really, really complex, it's much easier for the city to rely on NFPA and Florida Fire Prevention and say that we're going to allow fire pits of certain sizes with certain regulations, with these certain setbacks, and as far as appliance-specific things, we're going to defer to the NFPA and Florida Building Code. You can write that into our code that you can refer to NEC for electrical. You can refer to those things so that you don't have to get super specific in our code. You can rely on the national side of things.
What's also nice about that is as the code changes or updates, you don't have to constantly keep changing your.
Like when you buy a grill, it's got a sticker on it that nobody ever reads that says, don't use this under an overhang. Don't put it near this. The reason you guys need to put it in code is so that when insurance comes in after that guy burns the house down because he used it under the overhang, it wasn't something that their lawyers can come back against you and say, well, nothing in our building code says I couldn't put it underneath my porch. It's better for you to stay away from that in our code and rely on UL, NFPA, NEC, and the Florida Building Code, because then it's like, no, the manufacturer spec says don't put it underneath this, and you do this. So putting anything in that detracts from that just sets us up for a problem. I think the goal behind this, at least it seems like, is to let us put fire pits in with some control over where they go in, so that, because if you don't, and you don't put controls in, somebody's gonna dig a big hole in the backyard and drag a piece of chain link over top of it and go, no, what, I put fire mesh over it. That's, trash bags are what we like to burn. You're just trying to create something that he can enforce, so that when he goes out there and they go, nothing in the ordinance says that I can't have this, and his hands are tied, it's better to just in my opinion, to lay back on NFPA and say, okay, this is how all of this works. And we're going to put some restrictions on where you can put the fire pit and how big it can be. But other than that, we're going to stick to UL. We're going to stick to these building code regulations. Because the outdoor kitchen thing, he's got requirements on what you can put in there. Even a flat top has to have X amount of ventilation. It's got to be pulled away from it. The backings have to be certain fire stop materials. Nobody builds like that, but that's how it's supposed to be. Yeah. They try to sneak stuff in all the time, but that's how it's supposed to be built, is with all those pieces in place. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Makes sense. Any other comments on any of this stuff? On number 10, the 3x3, I guess that's at NFP as well?
Yep.
They don't have 4x4s? And the reason I ask is because I know that they're out there. And again, how these market this stuff,
there's a lot of things in there that are out there, but at the end of the day, again, I have to create a guideline that we can go by and enforce, and that
are you
when questions
just fed NFP?
No, it's followed through NFPA and the Florida Fire Service. This is all their recommendations. Again, I didn't make any of this up. I took recommendations from people much smarter, more involved than I am. Took those recommendations and put them together in an inclusive document.
Okay.
It's just going to be discretionary anyway.
At the end of the day, I don't go out there with a tape measure. If they have a 3x3 and they're burning a Christmas tree, if it's got 40-foot flames, we got a problem. You know what I mean? So the goal isn't to be restrictive. The goal is to make sure that people are being compliant, and when they're not compliant, we have the ammunition we need to stop it or change it.
Yeah. No, again, I just envision some point down the future a resident calls and says, I just got a ticket for my 3.5 by 3.5 thing. You see what I'm saying?
Like I said, I don't walk around with a tape measure.
You don't.
As long as the people are being reasonable and within regulation for the most part, we're going to do what we're going to do. Yeah. We're going to allow them to do what they're doing.
The only other comments I had on the ceremonial fires, the way this was laid out, and again, I know this is just kind of a draft or whatever, but it was, I think 13, 14 were more definition related, and 15 got into what that was. Just maybe lay that out a little differently, but I think that'd probably go into the ordinance.
And those came about, and we got with the Florida Fire Service on those because we had a church that was burning, and we went out there and they questioned it and started getting on us about ceremonial fires. So we had to turn around on them to show them in writing constitutes a ceremonial fire, and there is size limitations to those as well. So we were just trying to get them being crazy.
And those size limitations are also from the NFPA.
Yeah, and the Florida Fire Service. Yep.
Thank you.
Again, I didn't make none of those up. None of these are my idea. I'm a copy and paste guy when I can. It keeps me safe.
How loose is a ceremonial fire? I mean, that's pretty loose. I
That's like
guess.
asking them how loose is the speed limit on 19.
Yeah.
How far are you willing to go, sir?
All right, don't put me in this.
It's
I mean, I'm celebrating my my Thursday.
well, there's definitions for ceremonial fire. Their improvement structure, combustible material fences, any overhangs, branches. They got to be with a minimum of 100 feet from public road, 150 feet from an occupied building, and then above it, it talks about with a ceremonial bonfire, either a 3x3 pile, but it's got to be less than 8x8. So we allow you to make a lot bigger, more of a bonfire type fire for ceremonial purposes, because some of the churches, we're talking about what they use them for. And if you go to number 13, ceremonial fire means fires used for ceremonies sponsored by educational, cultural, or religious institutions. So it has to be at a church or a church function that's sponsored. So if they're sponsoring one at your house, then okay, but you're going to have to meet all those setbacks, which most of the houses in Port Richey won't meet those setbacks.
Yeah.
That's why the Florida Fire Service more than doubled the setback requirements for that, because if you're burning at a church or a church property, you're burning on acreage, so to speak. You're not burning at a residential house. But that's why they increased all of those numbers.
Would it be, I think it would probably be safe if they're gonna have a bonfire or a ceremonial fire and they have the lot to do it, that they should maybe require permission. One of you guys can go out there and tell them the do's and don'ts maybe before.
That's what I mean. Asking for a permit ahead of time. So what we do, and when we get that, if this gets approved, then I would forward that to the Florida Fire Service to make sure that they're aware as well. Because at the end of the day, if they're not in compliance, that's who I'm going to call to come out in the state, let the state and get involved, so I can step out of that whole thing and let them be involved in enforcing the state laws and the fining if there's going to be any fines involved.
A lot of work, Gary. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because it has been brought up numerous times over the years, and especially with the fire that you just fought, we need to have some parameters. So thank you.
I mean, it is a little bit of a slippery slope in a way. Like I said, it's so easy for me to say no burning because then there's no gray area. Anything you light, I'm blowing out. You know what I mean? But reality is, people want to enjoy the outdoors. So that's why this whole thing, it came up the first time, and I'm for it. I live in Hudson. I burn all the time. We have campfires all the time, and I think it's a great thing when it's done right. But there has to be parameters, and there can't be a lot of room in the parameters because people take advantage of that, and then we wind up with the situations that we had. So.
Okay. Anything else on burning?
No.
Okay. Moving on to item number 2. Anybody in the public like to speak on that? Okay. Item number 2, discussion of flood damage prevention ordinance. I'll pass that to Mr. Copper for introduction.
Thank you. As council is aware, staff has been working to try to reduce the cost of flood insurance for our residents in the city. What is being discussed tonight, and I'm going to turn most of this over to Mike and Veronica to handle the details on this. But tonight is the discussion of 2 topics. One is making a change from the substantial damage from 50% of market value down to 40%. And the second thing is lifting the freeboard from 1 foot to 2 foot. Now, I'll let them explain what all that means. So I'll let you explain.
Currently, we're in a flood zone. So FEMA puts out a map that says what our base flood elevation is for any construction done here in the city. For instance, let's use an example of 10 foot. It also said you have to have not only that, but you have at your design flood elevation, which is 1 foot above that. Your finished floor for your first living floor is at that 11-foot area. We're looking at moving it to 2 foot. And what that does is it increases that ability if we have a storm come in that is greater than what is expected in a normal, and it brings in higher flood floodwaters and stuff like that. It gives us that little extra buffer that's in there. Right now, at the last storm, Fort Myers and all them had 18 and 20-inch storm surges. So if we're at 10 foot, your first level was pretty much underneath. You know, your first living area was pretty much underwater. Is this going to fix that? No. You're going to get freak storms. But this is giving you that little bit of extra to get us out of that area. And in doing so, it also helps increase our CRS credits, which in returns gives all of the residents a discount on their flood insurance.
So it helps us in both ways. It helps, now keep in mind, these are only for new construction homes and for homes that are below the base flood. So these ordinances are making it, are becoming more stringent than what FEMA, because we're already compliant with what FEMA wants, but we're making it more stringent. With the sea level rise, with all of the climate changes that are occurring, with all of the storm surges coming in, with the hurricane patterns the way they're coming in, we're looking at getting inundated with more and more water. So by putting these codes, it benefits the community on the CRS for the rating system, and it also helps those people who are investing into their home to get out of the special flood hazard area. Currently, right now, we have 100 plus homes in a special flood hazard area. I can't tell you exactly, because it's confidential, exactly what homes are in a repetitive loss area, but I can tell you that the city of Port Richey has 100 plus homes in a special flood hazard area. In the repetitive loss area. I can tell you in the past 12 years, we have raised 10 homes through FEMA grants with Pasco County assistance. We have raised over 8 homes out of the special flood hazard area with these types of grants. So there is ways to do things, but making our codes more stringent is going to help us overall with our CRS points.
Give me what is a special threat area? What is that? Like, what is that? I mean,
The special flood hazard area,
you said, I thought you said,
repetitive loss.
special threat area. What were the two? I don't know.
You said special flood hazard area, I think.
The special flood hazard area.
What is that? Is that like below sea? I mean,
The special flood hazard area, or is that area that's below base flood elevation. So you have you have more chances and more likelihood of flooding.
so anything under what, 10 foot or 11 foot? You said.
Well, it depends.
Depends on you.
Is that like an A zone,
So you have different zones.
VE zone?
Yeah, so you have an AE zone.
Right.
You have a VE zone. And those are the two zones that we will see here, plus you have X zones. City Hall is in an X zone. It's not in a flood zone. It's high. But on our west side and our east side, we have AE zones and we have VE zones. Your VE zones are your high wind velocity zones.
Okay.
Those are built on pilings. Those are built more stringent. Those are built with breakaway walls to allow the flood waters to come in and the flood waters
Yeah,
to go
I think
out.
wave action is the
Yeah,
V.
yeah, your LINWA, your limit of moderate wave action. Your AE zones are in a flood zone, but they're allowed to be built on fill.
Okay.
You don't have to build them on pilings.
Okay.
Okay, so your question may be the program Forerunner that you've allowed the city to purchase is going to help us track this.
Okay.
Okay, so this all kind of ties in hand, and it's going to help us to track it. Elevation certificates currently we have online. If you do not have an elevation certificate online now today, you will have to hire a surveyor to get your elevation for your piece of property.
Okay.
We can tell you what elevation you need to be at, but a surveyor can tell you exactly where your land sits, what grade you're at, where your home has to be. Only a surveyor can do that. Okay?
And that's only for new construction, right?
So this is only going to affect new construction and homes that are below the base flood elevation.
They're being lifted.
That are being lifted. There's also programs out there FEMA has a residential buyout program. FEMA also has the elevation lift program through the grant program that we send them. So, so for everybody listening, I want you to know that we can get them in touch with the person at Pasco County who does help them and guides them through the process of lifting their homes if they choose to. There is money out there from FEMA to help raise these homes out of the special flood hazard area. They are out there. It is a process. It's not something that happens overnight. It is a process. There is, I say, prerequisites that they have to meet in order for this stuff to take place. But the city has worked, just sent over to Pasco County 3 addresses for elevation lifts. So it is continuously happening, and it can happen. Putting these codes into place will help our CRS plan. And it's going to help these things because the climate change is going to continue to happen. The sea level rise is going to continue to happen. And if we don't start making changes, are we compliant with FEMA's guidelines and rules today? Yes, we are. We're trying to get ahead of it before they mandate it. And so that's what we're bringing forward as far as the freeboard.
We're one, which same as FEMA now, 1 foot above.
We are. We're 1 foot above freeboard now
And then
currently.
is to go 2 foot basically.
So going a foot higher is going to help that new construction help that. So it doesn't make the road go higher. There's not going to be a drainage issue. We're still going to have to follow all of that. So people think sometimes if they go higher, that means the road's higher. That means they're putting up more fill. That means that they're bringing in. And so we're going to have a drainage issue. No, they're still going to have to bring in a drainage plan. They're still going to have to follow all the same guidelines. It's just moving it up a foot above.
What's a concrete block? Is that a foot? 8 inches.
8 inch.
So if we raise a foot, it's basically going to go. It's going to be more than a foot. Blocks.
Block and a half.
8 times 3 is 24.
No, I'm talking about the extra foot.
You're going to go an extra block and a half
An extra
from
block.
where
and a
you're
half.
at now.
So you're actually going to, in order to go another foot, you can't go a foot. You're going to go a foot and a half.
Oh, they can go. They got 4 blocks.
Well, no, you're going to have to go 12 feet if you're on the ground then.
It depends on the land too. Where it sits on.
Mike, sure.
Mike Friss, 5045 Waterside Drive. Okay, so that's what I do for a living. For those of you who don't know me, that's what Unified Foundations does. So I've lifted several of the homes we've lifted in the neighborhood. I'm in the middle of lifting one now on Deidre. So height is not going to be an issue because we're going to excavate under the house anyway, and the footers are going to have to be on virgin soil. So we usually go in 8-inch increments, and we will clear by at least that. Most of the residents in the neighborhood, the average through the neighborhood is through the town is about 5 feet grade right now, 5 feet above NAVD, which is the North American Vertical Datum. It's a line that was created to kind of represent mean high tide. So all of these numbers you're talking about are a reference above sea level, effective sea level. Most people's grade is around 5 feet. The closer to the water you get, the higher the required elevation from FEMA. But Fort Myers, homes that were compliant by 3 feet over the freeboard requirement in Fort Myers took 4 feet of water in that storm. Still in their first living floor. So catastrophic storm, we're not going to fix with code, right? What we can do is we can make it so that those people can afford to have real insurance by lowering the CRS. And I have this conversation all the time up and down the coast right now since all these storms. This is all I do all day. The lowering the CRS, so it's a scale, right? Lowering the CRS is going to lower the ratings. You guys buy a big policy every year so that FEMA will come in here and help when we have a disaster. That policy goes down overall when we do this. Lowering the CRS lowers all the residents' purchasable flood insurance. This is the first time that we've ever seen the National Flood Insurance Program since Ian and Adalia. The National Flood Insurance Program, up until right now, has always been the insurer of last resort, like Citizens, right? They have to take you. That is no longer the case. If your home has taken more floods now, if it's had floods, that the total payout covers the current 50% of the current taxable value of the structure, you have just received the last check that you'll ever get. They will not renew you. So we are going to be faced with residents that will not be able to get flood insurance on houses that are below the base flood, if it's already been paid out to that point. So if left unchecked, if we leave it at 50%, you get a lot of people, we've had several in town already, that will get the contractor to swing the numbers in the contract after an event to look like it's less than 50%, and they'll just put the house back together. They get their insurance money, they put the house back together. His hands are tied because they handed in a certified quote from a contractor that has an affidavit attached to it that says that, yeah, we're doing all the work under that number. And then, of course, the homeowner pays that guy in cash afterwards to do all the finished work. You know, I'm never going to make it inside 3 minutes. And then what happens is we end up with a property that if FEMA makes one more change to that, or NFIP makes one more change to that, we've got a freshly remodeled home that we had to give permits to that is land value. It's unsellable because it's uninsurable. So the reason that FEMA's pushing and they're giving credits using CRS, that's the only way they can kind of try to affect more change than what the minimum base is by giving us access to these credits. By giving us access to these credits, we financially damaged. If we set it at 40%, yes, you're going to have homeowners that are going to hit a spot where they simply cannot put their house back together. But if you will continue to allow them to skirt that by keeping the value higher, all you're doing is setting them up for spending that money next year or the following year. The storms aren't going away, right? I mean, we just took 4 flood events in the last year, and only one of them was named. The rest of them were afternoon thunderstorms that happened to be on a high tide with a southwest wind, right? This is a change that we have to start putting in place. And we've talked extensively about it. I've talked with lots of counties and municipalities about it. It is a scale, right? You don't want to anger the citizens by going, nope, can't put your house back together. You got to lift it or tear it down or move. But you also don't want to let them continue to rebuild or add on or build additions onto houses that are below the base flood, because you're just setting up a disaster later. And the way the current rules are written when it comes to real estate, if a bank forecloses on something or an investor buys a property that they never occupy as the occupant, then when they go to sign disclosures to resell that property, they can line right through the disclosures and say, I have no knowledge of any of that. I don't know if it's ever been flooded. And you got people moving here from out of state that maybe even have an out of state realtor. They come in, the disclosures say that house has never been flooded. They don't know the area. They're buying these houses and they've been put back together with no permits. They didn't take the drywall out. They didn't mitigate the flood. These are all things that are just setting the city up to have more and more and more problems. So I think it's a delicate balance. A lot of towns, Madeira Beach is a 4-foot freeboard because they do not believe that FEMA is adequate in their assessment of what the water level will be. So they have a 4-foot freeboard. And in a V zone where the freeboard limit is the bottom of the lowest structural horizontal member, now you've got 15-foot columns to get to the first I-beam, and then the house is sitting on top of that. Because it's got to be, that residence has a 12-foot requirement, and now we've got to throw all this extra freeboard on top of it. I don't want to see us go to 4-foot freeboard because houses start looking weird. All sticks on little narrow things. But I think a 2-foot freeboard makes really good sense. And the main reason the 2-foot freeboard makes really good sense is because even if we build something to compliance, so you build a brand new home that's absolutely compliant to today's standard, and next year, FEMA rewrites the maps and resets the base flood area for that spot where that house is 2 feet up, they are compliant to code, their flood insurance will be $12,000 a year. Because they are no longer insurance compliant to the current FEMA listing. So because FEMA is so wishy-washy on how they draw that map, it's somebody in Washington, D.C. looking at satellite data and going, sure, that's where that line goes. Right? That's 10 feet over there, that's 11 feet over there. Having the 2-foot of freeboard gives our citizens a little more push before they run into that base flood line of where the insurance is going to change pretty rapidly. The 40%, I think, is a reasonable push. You are going to get citizens that are going to get mad at you. They won't get mad at you until we have another storm event. That's when it's going to happen, because they're going to get a storm event if they're not someone who's trying to slide in an addition. And then that's where you give him the teeth to go, nope, no, we're not, you're below the base flood. You're not putting a 1,500 square foot addition on the back of this house. So we can flood 1,500 more square feet the next time we have a storm. But the average in the town is typically, we need to go up about 7 feet. What I tell most people, several of people in here I've given quotes to for their houses that are below the base flood. By the time you go 6 feet, you may as well go up to 9 and park under the house. The houses get prettier. You don't have stairs and then just use unusable space underneath. There's lots of different ways. We make these houses very pretty. They get better architecturally. We're putting 2024 compliant concrete structures underneath them. And then we're pushing that across the board everywhere to make sure that these things meet all the new codes, meet or exceed the new codes. But when you get done lifting one of these houses, they're a concrete block-on slab home sitting on a steel frame on a concrete ground floor parking structure. They're way better suited to take a hurricane than any of the new stuff that's out there that's just wood frame that barely meets the 150 mile an hour wind code. So making these codes a little more stringent, but giving him the teeth. They're working with the P&Z board and working with you guys to try and rewrite codes to make elevation more amenable than tearing down and building new. I mean, right now it's $350 to $400 a square foot to build a new waterfront elevated home, right? Elevations are a third of that. So that's why we're trying to push this across the board throughout the state. And FEMA's been very good. We've worked with the Pasco County, and the city of Port Richey specifically has done more grants than any other county in the state of Florida. Because your team and the Pasco County team is great at working with homeowners, getting the grants written, getting everything going. I'm working with counties statewide right now that don't even have a grant writing program. Their citizens have no choice. They're stuck. They can't access the grant programs. They can't do any of that. So anytime you make these ordinances better in the long run for making sure that eventually every building is flood compliant, you get FEMA's attention. You get Florida Department of Emergency Management's attention, that you're a county that's working on that, you're a city that's working on that. And then when someone puts a grant through, they go, oh, that's in Port Richey, yeah.
And those are, these policies are policies that we wrote. That was with the guidance of two individuals at Florida Department of Emergency Management. And so they have to approve everything, they have to look over everything, they put the verbiage in there, and they guide us and help us write that. We don't write that. We tell them what our city needs, what the community needs, and what would benefit the residents, what would help in the CRS for the flood insurance, but they guide the verbiage, they put all of this together.
And they also come here every 3 years and do a drive-by of the city. And they send us back a report on, and if there's something that we did that they didn't know about, we'll send them the information and stuff like that on some of the properties and stuff. Like the house that Mike's raising on Deidre, that was one that they didn't know about. So now they're asking us because they see that we're trying to take our city out of the flood zone and moving it back up. So that we've been almost a year working with them on this. So we put a lot of time and effort into it, and I think it's a benefit for the citizens. In your packet I gave you, it'll kind of give you a little idea. If you kind of go to the third page in there, it gives you, this is from FEMA's insurance thing. In Florida right now, there's 597,967 flood insurance policies in the state, with an average cost of insurance of $958. That's across the entire state. If you flip the next page, that's Port Richey. There's 652 policies in force, and this is as of September 30th of 2022. They don't have the new data out yet. But there's 652 policies, and our average cost of flood insurance is $1,520. So we're already almost doubling the state average just in the city. Then if you flip to the next page, it breaks it down by county. And if you remember, if you go down to Pinellas County, which Pinellas County on their CRS right now is a 2. We're at a 7. The lower the number, the better discount to our citizens, and the more stringent our codes are.
Is it Pinellas is at a 2?
Pinellas is a 2.
Yet their average cost is fairly high still, right?
Well, you got to go by. They're
Number
more
of homes.
coastal than we are. More, bigger homes and things like that. But take a look at that. Even so, with Pinellas having more policies in place, we're only $18 behind their average cost for insurance. Good.
Remember too that we have a very limited amount of space here that's V-zone. So we have a very, very limited strip number of homes that are V-zone rated. A V-zone policy starts at 3 times the rate of an A-zone policy. So Pinellas County, that's got tremendous amounts, everything on the beach, everything within a quarter mile of the beach, and everything on the intercoastal side, inside the fingers. If you've got more than about 450 feet of open water to your house, the likelihood's pretty high that you're in a velocity zone because there's enough distance there in open water for the wind to build waves.
So-
We're less concerned about the wind, concerned about is wave action that builds up against the house, and then when it washes away, it takes sand with it. So it undermines the foundation, and then it drops the foundation and lowers the house. So that's why we have to put them on piles and piers, and we have to do a whole bunch of extra work to make those stay up when we have that. Fort Myers Beach, I have clients that we had to put 13 feet of dirt back in their yards before we could start working on the structure. Because as the water left the intercoastal and washed back over Estero Boulevard, it cut ravines between the houses that were 12 to 13 feet deep.
One thing,
The bedrock.
one thing the city that he brought up, one thing that the city did do, so we have, let's use Harbor Point for an example. That whole point, the whole area there was a VE zone. So when FEMA redid their maps in June of 2020,
They took out a lot of VE.
they took all that out of the VE zone and they made it AE zone. So then we had people starting to develop in there that thought, oh, well, we can just build on fill and not have to build breakaway walls, not have to do engineered vents, not have to, build on piling. So it's cheaper for them, right? What they failed to realize is with us doing that, when FEMA redid those maps, the city of Port Richey adopted the LIM law. So, and what that says is, and that was one of the things that we adopted that got us extra CRS points because it made it more restrictive. So it said, okay, we understand that FEMA dropped you to an AE zone, but you still have to build it to the most highest code, which is the VE standard, because your property falls in the LIM law action, the limit of moderate wave action. So we adopted that code specifically to help those residents that are out there building $1 million homes say, hey, you don't just want to bring in fill, you want to put it on pilings, and this is why. And so that was another thing that we adopted to help those homes in that area or anybody in the VE zone that dropped to the AE zone. So it helped them on their flood insurance, but they still have to build it to the most restricted.
Next, you flip over to the last page that Scott did this on. For 2022, Pasco County paid out, well, we had 1,481 claims in Pasco for a total of $73.3 million in claims. So I just wanted to give you guys some numbers of where we're at. Even though we're small and don't have a lot of policies written, still our citizens on average are paying $18 less than they are in Pinellas County. That's huge. For some of our residents are paying outlandish amounts for this stuff. And one of the things that is going on now, Mike may be able to attest to it, is FEMA's actually going around and auditing down south because of they're spending out all the money and all this stuff, and they're continuously putting money into the same houses over and over and over and over.
But what
again.
they're finding is they're paying out. The flood insurance is paying out, right? FEMA is giving everyone checks, and they're not fixing the problem. They're pocketing the problem. They're trying to do it internally. They're trying to not pull permits for it. They're trying to circumvent what is supposed to and the intent of it. And so now what we're going to start to see, and what we're seeing is now with these audits happening from FEMA, is that they're driving around Every 3 years, they do come on site here. They do drive around with us, and they want to look at homes that are above the base flood elevation and have turned their bottom floors into living. Another thing the city of Port Richey did was adopt the non-conversion agreement that says you cannot convert your bottom into living space. That was another thing that got us some CRS points for. It's just putting policies in place to try to keep it uniform and to try to keep everybody, really to keep the flood insurance at a minimal cost, and keep everybody in compliance.
Let me ask you a question, because you just brought up something that makes me wonder how effective you could be if a flood came through here, like happened in with Adalia.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. We need to relocate this puck. I need to get the puck out of here.
We just need to relocate you.
Can we? I make a motion.
You're gonna have to wait about 3 more years, son. Anyway, flood came. FEMA paid out. Do they share that information with you so you can effectively manage who's doing work and ensure that permits are pulled on that property?
Unfortunately, we tried that with the last hurricane, for example. We drove around and we took over 300 pictures, 300 residents that we know for a fact were flooded. They would not allow us in. We got access into 2 or 3 homes out of every door we knocked on and every person we spoke to.
FEMA went into every one of those houses that got a check, guarantee it.
I'm sure.
How can we get that information shared at this level so that you can effectively do your job?
I don't know how that is transpired back to us. I'm assuming that falls under the repetitive.
So we have a list. We have a list in the office. It is confidential. I cannot share that.
We're not asking.
It's a list that we get from FEMA for data purposes,
Right.
to see who's had or who's been in a repetitive
A flood
in a
event.
flood, right? Or who has filed a claim. They're only going to show up on paper if they filed a claim.
True.
So if they didn't go through FEMA and they went through their insurance, it's up to FEMA to get us that data. So
Right, but once you have the data, you know something occurred there. There was a payout, right?
correct.
You
Right,
know
but
who,
we don't get that data right away.
no, but you have it now, probably, don't you?
From 3 years
From 3
ago.
years ago.
But not from September.
No. I won't get that data for probably another year.
How is it that they paid the data, wrote the check, they have an address that mailed or was deposited
It's the same
direct?
thing we asked. We've asked those questions. Why are we continuously paying?
You know,
Why
we have
is-
a congressman sitting down here that we can probably lean on a little bit to get information.
Sure.
Is that something that we can follow up on?
No. So, if I may, FEMA has a, let me just pull this up quickly. It's an information sharing access agreement. So they're pretty clear. I mean, there's all kind there's an entire list here of how long it takes for you all to request the information, what the process is, and it's from the Homeland Security Office. So
Right, so we've asked, but we haven't received. Is that what we're?
it takes time. There's
Well,
a,
what's the period?
We did send an email I have it here, in late, I want to say November of last year.
Right.
And we just went to the conference a month ago. And along with us, there are several counties also and
In the same
municipalities
situation.
waiting for the same information. So yes, we did put the email out to them and we are waiting for them.
Okay, so it's basically a back burner right
Go ahead,
now.
Mike. You got something to say?
Yeah.
So Cape Coral's dealing with this. Cape Coral took 4 foot of water ubiquitously across every resident. And then they rode through, code enforcement had to ride through afterwards. And of course, everybody just ran to Home Depot and started tearing stuff out and got their buddies and started clearing the houses out and started putting stuff back together. And code enforcement rode around and started dropping red tags on doors. And telling them to, you're done. I'm shutting it down. You got to get out of here, which these guys did when they could catch it, right? When they could catch it. What changed is that their hands were tied too. what they did down there, and I don't know how we go about doing it, what they did down there was they went to Army Corps of Engineers, which is who rode around and did the initial assessment of everything that got flooded. And they had Army Corps of Engineers develop a letter throughout the town of Fort Myers, throughout Cape Coral, that said, that building looks damaged, building looks like it was structurally damaged. You can't move back into it until you provide for us a structural letter that says that it's clear. And that granted code enforcement and FEMA access to all of those dwellings, and a requirement that someone go in and inspect them and show what damage was done with pictures and everything else. That's how they set that up down there. So I don't know how you guys would have to do it with code, or how you'd have to do it by giving him teeth. I know that the non-conversion agreement, I was in here when we wrote that. We were very specific about making sure that it didn't violate the 14th Amendment to allow him to just walk in and take pictures, that he has to show probable cause and he has to go through a process. And maybe there's a route for us to do that within the ordinance to give him the teeth to be able to go, that house had 24 inches of water and that house had 24 inches of water, and I've got an elevation certificate here that shows that you're the same height as those two. Prove to us that you didn't take water, or show me where the receipts are for the contractor that put this together right. That's what they're doing Cape Coral right now. And they changed the code as of January 1st. They changed the rating that they get to use for how much the value is. So if you're gonna put it together yourself, you and your buddies are gonna get together, go do it yourself, you have to account for your labor in that quote so that they can find out if you were substantially damaged or not. Now what they're doing is they're going in and saying, if you didn't pull a permit to put this house back together, and we have pictures that show this road was underwater, that house was definitely underwater, you have to show me where this was done, and it was done legally, and you did the mold mitigation properly. And if you can't show me a contractor's bid and invoices for all the work that was done in here, then we get to dictate what value there was on that house. And at $84 a square foot, which is what the new code is for interior work, you eclipse that 40 or 50% substantial damage limit very rapidly. And if it's a double edge, right? If you can provide that contractor's document to code enforcement, then they turn around and call DBPR and go, you didn't pull a permit. You did $235,000 worth of work on this house and didn't pull a permit. So it's a mess in South Florida right now. That's why we want to write these ordinances the way we want to write them now. We want to get ahead of this to give him the teeth to be able to go through and go, no, 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 no. You know, we have to be very upfront. During the last event, there was a lot of misinformation. They had no idea how much drywall can I change? How much trim can I change? Like, what's the mitigation procedure? What's code? And so the homeowners just jumped out there way ahead of him. You've got all of them 2 days later out there trying to figure out how to repair their stuff. And he's got one code enforcement guy in him trying to figure out who got wet and who didn't get wet and try to stay ahead of it. So we definitely need to change the teeth in code enforcement when dealing with a storm event and find out I don't know legally how much teeth you can give him, but to give him the ability, and code enforcement the ability, to go in and go, you know, we know this was wet. How did you mitigate it? You know, now if you didn't tear any drywall out and you can show us from a mold mitigation person that they came in here and drilled holes right above the base and they sprayed bleach in there and that's an adequate approved methodology for mold mitigation because you only had 3 inches of water or something like that, that's fine, but we need to give him the teeth to be able to do it. We don't have code for that. Right now he's got to kind of fall under the, if you won't let me in, I can't go in and take pictures. I have to guess that you're doing something wrong outside. And maybe it's it's something we can amend in the code to give him that ability to do that. Because if we don't, what ends up happening is FEMA sees that we let a bunch of people put their stuff back together and they pull back from us. They don't want to help us out. They don't want to throw grant money at us. Right now, Port Richey is in the focus of FDEM and FEMA because we've put a lot of policies in place and we are doing a lot of grant lifting. We're about to lift 3 or 4 right now that are waiting on changes at the county that have already signed their agreements to lift right here, right in town. The county is pushing. This town has been in every single FEMA meeting for the last 5 years. At least one of the houses we're lifting in this town has been up on the big TV And our guy from Pasco County has been in there and on texting me. All right, they're asking how much that house weighed, the blue one on Bay. And I'm like, okay, it was this. Feeding him information so that he can tell the crowd what's going on. FDEM is watching. FDEM and FEMA want a target space. It was supposed to be New Smyrna Beach. They brought a really crappy contractor in. They trashed 2 houses in the lift process, and the city bailed on the program. The county wants to get FEMA's looking for a test bed to come in and go, we're going to grant every home that's below the base flood. We want to see every home in this neighborhood. We want to show that we can lift an entire neighborhood or an entire town. Bring it up, bring the roads up, get it all done. This is how you do it. Because if they can prove that model, FEMA's goal is simple. To 10 years from now or 15 years from now, to never have to have this conversation again. Everything that can be lifted is either been lifted or destroyed and rebuilt as a new home. So they're going to throw buckets of money after a community that's showing that they're trying to become as compliant as they can possibly be. There's huge grant money available. Lee County pulled $1.4 billion in HMGP funds after Hurricane Ian. They're only going to lift 32 houses with that. They're going to use less than $10 million in lift mitigation. The rest of that money went into the community. And it's all grant money available after a flood because they went in and went, nope, we're going to rewrite every code. We're going to make this place a FEMA showcase. That's what we have the opportunity to do here. This is the first start. But we have the ability to build a showcase here that shows that every time we have the opportunity for him to get a house out of the flood by either condemning it because it doesn't meet the substantial damage level, or them helping write a grant to someone who's a fixed income. We've got so many ways to pay for that at this point that if you get a grant and you can't figure out how to help pay for that, then you didn't do any research. I mean, their lenders are chomping at the bit to throw loans at people to do these construction loans because FEMA's going to repay it. What bank wouldn't do that, right? They get 7% for 6 months and then they get their money back. That's an ideal mortgage scenario. So there's a ton of ways to do this for the citizens, but we have to have legislation in place that makes that work. And the more things we can do that make FEMA happy, the more likely they are to dump that bucket our direction. And if they do, they were offering $61 million to that community in New Smyrna Beach. They were going to lift an entire neighborhood. And unfortunately, they let an idiot be involved in the grant process, and they brought in the lowest bidder, the lowest lift bidder, and that guy came in and he broke 2 houses, and the city backed out of it and didn't want to be involved. We have a great working relationship. I'm not pitching my company. I'm just saying we have a great working relationship. There are good contractors in the state, and the county and DEM are excited about seeing this happen. That's why we got 4 grants. We got 4 grants. I wrote twice as many grant applications in Pinellas County. They got 2. So we're doing something right. My hope would be that we continue that, right? Because it is going to be a push. Like I said, are we going to get some pushback from it from citizens? The next time he has to say, no, sorry, you met your 40%, you're 42% of your taxable value. I can't let you rebuild this. You're going to have to go up, right? They're going to complain. They're going to throw a fit. They're going to get mad at him. They're going to cuss and throw a fit, and they may sell. It's the nature of where we are right now in this environment, right? There is so much land for sale right now in Fort Myers and down in Lee County right now that brand beautifully permitted remodeled homes, because they were worth $2 million. They had the room in the 50% budget to put the house back together. They're completely remodeled. They're gorgeous on gorgeous canals with a view of the beach. They are not sellable. Nobody's buying them. So property values down there are dropping like a rock. If you want to invest, now's the time in Fort Myers. You're probably going to get wet. If you guys want to do it. What I'm saying is, this will raise our property values. Every one of these we put in the air lowers the CRS rating and raises the overall property values. It raises your tax base, right? These houses are going up. Now, I will push all day long for you guys to work with the county, because the state The people who don't live on the water didn't vote for the tax breaks for people who lift for flood mitigation. That was on the books, 4 years ago? There was an ordinance that was put up to allow property tax breaks so that you could maintain your housing cap, your Save Our Homes cap, and you could elevate the home and not take a big tax penalty in property taxes. And of course, because most of the state doesn't live on the water, it didn't pass. Now counties are doing it county by county with their property assessors. They're trying to pass those rules. And I've been talking with Congress people and everything else, trying to get that pushed as much as we can. Again, something that we could talk to them about, or you guys could talk about within the tax code for Port Richey, right? Of not keeping a cap on that if they do a flood. I have customers that will not do a lift if it's gonna mean that, like, I got a guy in Davis Island that's like, no, wait, dude, I've owned this house for 30 years. I pay $6,000 a year in property taxes. If I tear this down and I build a brand new one, it's gonna be $60,000 a year in property taxes because it's new construction on Davis Island. So he's like, no way. Well, I talked to the property appraiser and he went, no, it's gonna go up by the cost of 2,200 square feet of garage, because that's what you're building in. It's still the same house. It doesn't get a new CO. It's still 1953. But it'll be a remodeled 1953 two-story with a 6-car garage downstairs, and he'll get a tax bump for the 6-car garage as if he built an addition. But it's not gonna change his homestead because the property appraiser is willing to play that, to work that game. Those are things that we have to start considering, because the more conducive we make the environment for people to elevate or tear down or use any of the other programs. There's a purchase program where the county will purchase the land and tear the house down because it's more cost effective at that point to tear that house down and just resell the land if the house is just not worth a lot. There are programs where they will give them money to tear the house down and build a big, pretty new thing that's gonna get you 4 times the tax money. There's lots of grant programs available but all of them lead to me retiring early because there's nothing left in the area that I want. And that's the goal, right? The goal is to get you guys to never deal with it. I want him to be like, hey, we got wet. Yeah, we'll go at 9. Everybody's safe. Everybody's on the 2nd floor drinking margaritas because nobody's below base flood, right? Nobody's climbing up on their roof because there's 5 feet of water in their house. Every customer I have that I've ever lifted a house is like, you have no idea what it's like to watch to know the storm is coming and sit on the 2nd floor and be like, might have to get mullet out of the pool. That's the worst thing they're gonna have to deal with, right? So it's peace of mind for the neighborhood. It keeps them from having to chase to rescue people because they're living in a house that's gonna get wet, right? And we recover so fast after a storm. Right, and all the rates go down. Every one of these things we lift, the flood insurance is less than $1,000. You still maintain flood insurance because you have to, but it's cheap because you're compliant now. So this is a golden opportunity right now to paddle ahead of the wave a little bit and be proactive in front of FEMA and let FEMA go, wow, that's the test bed. That's how we want to see communities do it, right? Some good press for Port Richey would be good for a while. So
just to piggyback on what Mike was saying on the teeth for enforcement, right now there's 3, and I've said this before in other meetings, there's 3 ways I can enter a property: open permit, permission from the landowner, or an administrative warrant. And as the city attorney will tell you, we applied a administrative warrant to a resident who had enclosed his bottom floor of his house. But the last line in the Florida statute says that it is not operable for an administrative warrant on an owner-occupied property. We know we had the photos. The gentleman was renting it out as an apartment. We actually went to court, and the judge threw it out. So we have teeth there, and as Mr. Mueller will probably know, most of our code enforcements that I write are for no permits. And I would venture to say, just spitballing, 80% of those are from the last flood. Because we drove out, the old code enforcement officer and I drove out at 4 o'clock in the morning when the storm kind of calmed down. Drove around, checked the roads so fire and PD could do their thing and not take $1 million equipment down flooded roads. And then once the light came on, one of the firemen and Code and myself drove around and we took over 300 pictures of high water lines on properties. Gave everything a couple days to rescind. Veronica, myself, and another one of our staff went out and we went by every property, knocked on every single door that we had pictures from, and it was less than a handful that allowed us any access in. So it is, I understand why a lot of folks don't want to do it. I have a reputation, but I just want everything to be done the right way. I want everybody to be safe. I want everybody in their home in the city to be safe and have a quality of life. By putting these ordinances in place, it's going to help the city on the flood. It's going to help the citizens with their added insurance costs. And eventually, we're going to bring this whole city up out of a floodplain, and we're not going to, hopefully, we're not going to have to deal with these issues on the flood as much as we are anymore. So that's my little spin.
One last thing.
Sure.
Every pre-1980 home that I've worked on in the city that went through the 93 or the no-name storm in 93, every single one of them, when we've pulled the kitchen out of them in a remodel, has had black mold on the wall behind the cabinets because they did not claim and they did not mitigate. And those people, every owner of those buildings since the 93 storm has been living in a black mold environment. And that's what happens when you don't give him the ability to go in and make people have to mitigate properly. They cut corners, they go in, they just put some fans up and go, man, we only took like 6 inches of water and it was gone in like 10 minutes, it's fine. Drywall wicks 4 feet up in less than an hour. It's wet, it's growing something. This is Florida, it's growing something. So it's a health hazard. These are all of these things are reasons to get the teeth into this, to do this. Again, are we gonna anger some citizens when it comes time to telling them that they can't have a permit to get their work done? Absolutely. Are they gonna be grumpy about it? Yes. 10 years from now, will that matter? No, every house will be in the air or mitigated and we won't have that problem. You're never gonna make everybody happy anyway. But it's a safety risk, right? As a realtor, the number of houses that I've gone through that we've lost the deal in Florida because it was improperly mitigated back in the day. And now you go in and you run a mold test in these things and they're a disaster. And you can't find it. It's got a new AC system. It's got all new insulation. I don't understand how we have any mold. And you pull a vanity cabinet away and there's a black square on the wall, the shape of the vanity cabinet where they haven't been able to paint. And it's growing in the drywall. So just, there's more reasons why giving him some teeth and giving them the ability, figuring out a way to give them the ability to make sure this doesn't happen. You know, will people be grumpy for a while? Sure, as we go through storms, but we will eventually get every single property compliant. And then you can raise the roads.
Yeah. So you guys have a fantastic sales job. I was on board with this way back half hour, 45 minutes ago. So no brainer stuff here. We need some stuff here. Now, a couple things I had on it, on the teeth. Where are the teeth allowing you to do that? What are we adding to that? Because I didn't see that. And I'm not even sure what that is.
Well, the teeth part about it is, I mean, I have the ability to do things now. I just can't go walk in somebody's house. But going out, being more, we put some stuff in place. We've gotten some stuff from FEMA as well. Piggyback on what Mike was talking about the permit process with somebody can come in and say, oh, I'm only doing this for $8,000. Florida Building Code says that it's basically at my determination of what the value is going to be. When we go out and actually meet folks out there, we're only looking at the things that are permittable. FEMA looks at everything that's going to put that house back to the original pre-flood stage. So some of the things that we'll go out there and look at, like cabinets, baseboards, interior doors, flooring, paint, those are not permittable items. Okay? So when I go out there and look at something, I'm allowing somebody the ability to make changes to their property, bring it back. It's not permitted. That's the only thing I'm looking at. When FEMA goes in there looking at the whole I don't know if anybody's done a cabinet job or a kitchen remodel. You're looking at anywhere from probably $12,000 to $60,000 just for that. Well, if your house is only $200,000 and you're doing a kitchen and a bathroom, you've exceeded your 50%. That's because FEMA's going in there and taking your cabinets, your flooring, and everything else. I'm not looking at that. Am I looking to go in there and beat everybody to death? No. But I know what things cost. And the building code gives me the ability to either use ICC, which is the International Code Council, that has an algorithm that will figure the square footage and what work's being done in there, and it'll spit out what it's supposed to be. Or I have another it's called RS Mean. It's a book that the department bought me that I can go through there and basically tell you everything that's being done, and that's what it is. I cannot, by law, ask for a signed contract from a contractor. I can't do that. So my biggest problem that I have with owner builders now is they don't want to do the labor part about it. They say, well, I got this fence for $75. Good for you. But the price of your permit is based on the total job cost. This material, this amount of labor, this is what it is. On the enforcement side of it, I have that in place now. If I go out and I see that you're not doing anything that is permitted work, you're getting a code violation and you're going to go to court. You're going to pay a triple fee on your permit. That's the enforcement side on that.
Nothing here though. Nothing in here gets you more access than you have.
No, it doesn't. All we're doing is right now is we're changing the cumulative from being a year, stretching it out 5 years. We're changing it from 50% to 40%. That's basically saying that you can spend $40,000 on your $100,000 house over this 5-year period instead of doing $40,000 year after year after year.
So a couple questions on those couple data points. So let's talk about the 50 to 40% first. So there's CRS rating points that are involved in that. Let's say we go 50 to 49, 50 to 48. Is that the further you go down, the more points you get? Or is if you're just below it, you get a certain block of points?
You're below FEMA. So
Any point below FEMA,
yes.
you get a X amount of
Yes.
points. So it doesn't matter if we go to 10, you don't get any more points for that.
You have a certain amount of points for this line item. So, and it's based on whoever that auditor is.
Right.
And it'll fall within their, I don't know how the whole algorithm gets done based on it. But if we drop just based on what you have right now, we have the potential of 490 points just on these items right now, which right now we are only 211 points from dropping one class from a 7 to a 6. That will give our residents an additional 5% discount. We're 711 points from dropping 2. So we're at 490 potential just by making these ordinance changes now. Plus, well, you guys giving us the okay to get on with Forerunner, that's going to add more points to that, to add on top of that 490. As well as we're in the process of having all of our maps and stuff put through GIS. There's additional points on that. So we have a potential of our next
We have a good
cycle
potential
to
to
drop
drop
2 classes.
a couple.
Again, and I get all that, but my very specific
Right.
question is, if we go 50 to 49 or 50 to 40, there is zero difference in the benefit from a point perspective.
From a point perspective, you're correct.
So the only difference from going from 49 to 40 is the inability for a person to, it's lowering their threshold to be able to do things.
That's correct.
So, which adds to that point of citizens are angry, right? And, so do we really want to reduce it for no tangible point benefit below 49? I mean, I 100% agree, 200% agree, we go better, 49, whatever it is. But where do we draw that line? Because the closer we get to 0, the less somebody has an ability to do that. And
Well, like you were saying earlier, was when you go, we had talked about this, and we had said, what is the differences between 40 to 48, 40 to 45, and what are the differences? What could potentially happen is they start to circumvent. And they start to say, okay, like what we're seeing now at the 50%.
Mhm.
We're starting to see people do things under that 50% that we know exceeds that 50%. But they've got their contractors that write up these reports that say, and that's what. So if you make the margin so close, they're going to still try to do that. If you widen it a little bit, even if you drop it to 45 versus 40, it gives us a little bit more of a leadway. And it kind of restricts them from being able to do that.
Well, it's all relative to the amount of damage that
Correct.
happens, right?
Everything's
So
going to be right. And remember, this is only going to affect the people below base flood and the new construction.
Right. And another thing I want to bring up too, this is also that percentage is cumulative. It's not a one-time event, right? It's cumulative over.
Well, that's what we're looking at doing is because right now we're at 50% 1 year. So if you have a $200,000 house, you can do $100,000
Every
worth
year.
of improvements every year.
Right.
Give you an idea of some of the surrounding areas. I'm gonna mess this up. Ferdinanda Beach is right now in their ordinance is a 2-foot freeboard and 30% every year. Madeira Beach is a 4-foot of freeboard and they're 50% through 10 years. So it's cumulative over 10 years. And they have a special occasion in there. If you've had 2 flood events, you can't go past the 2 flood events. If you had 2 flood events in that time, Newport Richey, our neighbor, is 50% in 5 years. So they're cumulative. They took away the 1 year and went to 5 years. Seminole County, 50% over 5 years. Pasco County is still at 49% with 1 year. But like we were talking with them, the majority of Pasco County is not in a flood zone. The municipalities that fall within Pasco County are. So, well, I say the coastal areas and stuff. So Pasco really, it doesn't really affect them by changing that because most of the municipalities have their own ordinances, so it doesn't affect them. I included them because we like to throw Pasco and Newport together, but a lot of the counties are a lot more stringent than we are. And I agree. It doesn't have to be 40%. It could be 45. It could be 48. It could be, I wouldn't go to 49, kind of like what Veronica was kind of talking about. You're 1%. You're talking 10 grand. So let's take that away, move it back 45, but put the cumulative in there.
What's the FEMA timeline? Is that a year? That's their
On
on
their,
the cumulativeness of it.
I don't think it says
So
cumulative.
so whether we go 1-5, there's no CRS
Right,
benefit.
I think it's just
That's-
based on the 50%
right.
on theirs. I didn't see a cumulative on there.
Is it 50% for one rating and below 50 is another? Is that's a step
If you
down?
get better, basically you get a block of
The-
points.
The further you go down, the better your score.
Right.
So
Well, that's counter to what I asked.
I'm sorry.
So if we go to 49 or we go to 40,
It's the same.
it's the same or it's not.
I thought you meant on the CRS thing. I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm sorry. Yeah. As far as I know, and that's why I revert to Veronica, she's more on the CRS side. It's under my understanding, and she can prove me wrong, is it's based on the way that they break the points down when they do our 5-year cycle visits on our audits. It could be more, it could be the same. I don't have that answer. That's why I
But
revert
they,
to
can you
Veronica.
say, Veronica, it doesn't matter?
It stays the same.
I don't have a clear answer to that.
Well,
I don't want to answer to
yeah,
that.
I would want to know that before we make any decision on
Okay.
what that number is. Because in my mind, if we aren't getting any tangible benefit from it, we're really penalizing people that are trying to repair their homes within that percentage.
So there's a really good document from Columbia Law School from the National Resources Defense Council, and it talks about breaking the cycle of flood, rebuild, repeat, because that's the point of this. The
I
point
agree.
isn't to penalize citizens, it's to potentially save their lives. Like if it's flooding and they're rebuilding, and then it floods and they rebuild, and it floods and they rebuild, and they continue that process. What if one time it floods and they die? How is that?
Well, what if they climb up top of the city hall
What if they
and
evacuate?
jump and
I mean-
kill themselves? So, I mean,
Yeah.
Well, that's
you're gonna. Here's my point here. You got to be careful that
Oh
you
my
don't
God.
force an elderly person that lives in these homes, if they get to the point where they reach this threshold, they can't fix their home and they're out, right? So,
But the point is to make sure that potential lives are saved, right? We don't want, what if what happened to Fort Myers happens here? That could be way worse for us. That could result in a loss of lives that you and I can't even think about.
sure.
And you can't say like, oh, well, if somebody jumps off, which is outrageous. This is about prevention of those kinds of things, which is also what, by the way, suicide prevention is.
Right. Well, you put people in the street too. That's a bad thing too. I'm not, what I'm saying is don't, in reality, we all live here in this. I live on Green Street in a house that could be flooded, and if I don't evacuate, I could lose my life. I mean, that's a choice that I make by living here, right? So I don't need the government to tell me I can't live here. You follow me? So all I'm saying is I'm all about making these guidelines stringent so that we don't get into that cycle. But if the only benefit that the city gains is getting somebody out of their home faster.
Oh no, the benefit is saving our citizens' lives.
I don't think the goal is to get them out of the house. I don't think, I
Well, that
know that's
is.
not the goal. No, that's
No,
not the
that's
goal.
not.
Well, so it's like this is the balancing act I was talking about, right? So there's a balance between wanting to serve the citizens and not having them have undue strife, right? When they have already had an event, right? Okay, you guys just got flooded, you just lost everything, and how aggressively we want to never have them have that event again, right? Over a period of time, right? So this all ultimately stems back to, you can thank Louisiana for the 50% rule, right? That is a community that just kept getting flooded and they keep rebuilding and they keep getting flooded and they keep rebuilding. And if we don't do anything now, it's not just going to be a scenario where prior to this set of storms, it was just going to be a scenario of people are going to keep getting wet, houses are going to keep getting done, and they're little floods, so we're not losing lives. We haven't had a Fort Myers, right? This was a near miss. I mean, it was still 100 miles offshore, and we got wet. What you're dealing with, though, is that you're creating consistent property loss over time, which costs everything more money over a tremendous amount of time. And you're just delaying the inevitable of these houses being demolished and turned into something new. You're stretching it out over a tremendous amount of time by allowing them to do that. So I agree that we don't want to go crazy. I think there's probably a balance in there because 40% and 5 years, the next flood event, we're not putting any houses back together. Like they're all vacant. But to both of your point, right? No, we don't want to kick someone who's in fixed income, who's lived here for a really long time out. But we also, in the interest of the citizens, we don't let someone who doesn't want to climb stairs build a brand new home that doesn't have any. Because we have ordinances. The Florida Building Code exists for life safety purposes, right? The idea is to build something that's safe for people to live in. So there's a really delicate balance between how aggressively we want to elevate every home in the town and how do we serve our citizens by not forcing them out of their homes. But like we just saw in Fort Myers, like you hear the adage all the time, there's a cost that comes with living on the water, right? Right now we pay that cost with taxes. We pay a much higher property tax for the benefit of living on the pretty water.
Our insurance is high because
we live on really pretty water. But that's where the change is right now because of the environment we're in. If we allow them to rebuild, we're going to let them throw 200,000 just short of the 50% rule because the contractor, now he can't ask the contractor for a signed contract, but every municipality down south right now is requiring an affidavit signed by the general contractor that says that all of the work that is on this cost sheet is what they're getting paid this much money to do all of that work. And you have to put 100% of everything on that sheet, and the homeowner has to sign it in front of a notary. That every dime this is all of the money it will take to get the house back to that. And if they violate that, they're violating a signed legal document, right? And that little bit of causes the contractors to be like, I'm not touching that. Like, I'm not going to jail because you don't want to cover the 50% rule. There's probably a balance in here. Maybe it's 45% and 2 years. Whatever is a balance between better CRS ratings and slightly more aggressive codes so that we don't keep putting, because the reality is that when a lot of these people get wet out here, they're not staying. An investor's buying these houses up off these people because they're tired of getting wet. They're not going to live in it again. So a tremendous number of the houses that got wet got sold very rapidly to people that were investors that are just going to turn around, and if we don't have teeth in there to give him the ability to stop them, they're just going to roll in and Band-Aid it back up and sell it again. So it's a balance between serving the citizens but not allowing them to keep putting themselves, I mean, that's why we have government, right? Is so that people don't keep getting themselves in the same exact spot, right? We've got a crosswalk because everybody should be smart enough to walk across the street where it makes sense. But we still have laws there because they don't. They run across the street and play Frogger. So we have to play this game of how aggressively can we adjust the city so that we don't ever deal with it again versus how much.
If we could talk a little bit more about those numbers. You mentioned about just fixing a new kitchen, right? Let's take what's our median home price? 250, 300,000, 400 median. That high, really?
I went to my investigator. She'll look it up for us.
Median.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking 300 something. Well,
But remember, you're not talking about total price. So she's probably not going to get structure value, assessed structural value.
Minus the land.
Minus the land. So say you've got a $275,000, easy math, right? $400,000 piece of property, and 200 of that's the land.
Right.
The tax assessor's got 200 on the building. You get 50% of the building. $100,000 worth of work you can do.
Right.
Now, there are things that he doesn't have to include in that under normal circumstances. Like he said, under normal building circumstances where you're repairing a home not after an event, it's just him putting, it's like, okay, that roof is permittable. But there's even realms in that. It's repair or it's maintenance. I don't have to include that in that rating, in that cumulative rating over time. He has the leeway to do that already. When we have a storm event, it becomes a completely different thing because now it's a FEMA rating thing and it's called substantial damage. If the building takes more than 50% of the structural value to put it back to pre-storm condition, everything included, then at that point is deemed substantially damaged and has to be brought up because it's below flood zone in a special flood hazard. It falls under FEMA's purview of now it's out of building code's hands. It's under the FEMA code of the entire structure has to be brought up to code. And the biggest element of bringing the entire structure up to code is getting it to flood compliant height.
How does that play into like pools, accessory structures?
That stuff doesn't matter. It's not it's the living floor.
Just the living space.
Yeah. It's
all that other stuff doesn't count.
Right.
So.
And flood insurance doesn't cover any of that stuff anyway.
Right. Like, right, but if the value of that goes into that equation, I'll say it causes a problem.
No, not accessory structures doesn't go into that.
That's what I'm saying. So,
Yeah.
just so the structure to understand the process. So let's say we have a $300,000 home. Okay, that's the living structure, not the lot or anything. So $300,000. Currently, once they get above $150,000, they can't fix it. They like, right? So if I come in, and this is just during a storm event, right? So if I just replaced my kitchen and let's say it cost me $100,000, I really went crazy in my kitchen. I'm still at zero.
Mm-hmm.
So that's included. Okay, so basically I've already used up $100,000 in my kitchen. If I get a storm event, I'm at $50,000 and I'm done.
And in these communities that are 30% over 5 years, or the one that's 50% over 10 years, if you do a roof and an AC unit and a kitchen remodel or anything over the course of 10 years, you could get an afternoon rainstorm and take enough damage that you're not getting a permit, you cannot live in it again. But the reason for the teeth of that, the reason FEMA has that code put in place is because, the reason they have those codes in place is very specifically because they don't want people to continue living below the base flood. They don't want to continue.
Keep in mind, these are houses, new construction, and houses that are below base flood elevation. The goal is to get them.
Right. Yeah, but once they're above, then you can spend as much money.
And you can spend as much money as you want.
Somewhere in the conversation so far,
I'll just stay here.
if FEMA pays somebody out 2 times or a
Three.
specific number of times, 3 times, then at that point FEMA will say, if it gets flooded a 4th time, that's it, we're done.
So up until now, there's been no limit. So up until now, FEMA would just keep paying and paying and paying every year. Congress had to pass a rule last term, that capped NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program's flood policies at $12,000 a year, $1,000 a month on top of your mortgage for your flood insurance. Because the premiums were going above that. They were $23,000, $24,000 on houses that were really expensive and in mega high risk zones. The FEMA 2.0 rate, and by the way, those numbers he's got that are from 2022 are pre the FEMA 2.0 rating system. Okay, my house is very flood compliant. I have 17 and a half feet to get to my first living floor above mean high tide. We're not likely to get wet on our living floor. FEMA 2.0 rating system wanted $7,500 a year for my flood insurance. Now I told him he was crazy and that he had needed to reassess things because that system's super broken, the FEMA 2.0 rating system. But those numbers aren't even actively reflecting where we are now. Because what they snuck in when they snuck in a $12,000 cap on the NFIP premiums was they snuck in a caveat in there that said that because we can no longer charge you for whatever the risk might be, we also don't have to take you. So if your risk is so high that $12,000 does not cover the premium and we've paid out enough to reach 50% of the value of your structure, we will not renew your policy. Period. You're not getting renewed.
So how does that work when you have to have flood insurance?
Because private insurance is now in. So the NFIP was built originally because when Congress passed the rule that said FDIC-backed mortgages had to have flood insurance, there was no private flood insurance available in most of the coastal communities. Nobody was willing to write a policy because all these houses are ground level and they're high risk. So the NFIP was built at that point because we wrote a law that said you had to have it, and then we had to make a way for you to have it. The government never wanted to be in insurance. That's why 5 years ago, the NFIP was on the chopping block to not get funded. They were going to do away with the NFIP program because after the Biggert Waters Act was passed 10 years ago, the Biggert Waters Act changed the way the rules went, and all the subsidies started going away and all the insurance rates started going through the roof. When all of that was done, all of a sudden it was attractive enough because the lowest guy in the industry sets the price for the industry. So when the NFIP started jacking their rates up to get closer to actuary, Lloyd's of London and all these private insurers were like, well, yeah, we'll take that. Sure, we'll take $10,000 premiums from everybody in that neighborhood. How often are they really going to get wet? And then everybody got into flood again, and the NFIP, Congress went, well, it's a $19 billion loss every year, the National Flood Insurance Program, because FEMA pays disaster recovery funds out of the same bucket that they pay the premium bucket that they pay for recovery for people who are insured. It's a loss. So the Congress wants the NFIP to go away because it's a loss every year. It's a mega loss every year. Right now, because of the way this environment's working, because private flood insurance doesn't have a $12,000 cap on it, the NFIP can tell you no. Because there is someone who will write you. It may be $30,000 a year. And now you're seeing mortgage companies, and I knew it was going to happen after Ian, you're seeing mortgage companies that have just figured out that they're writing $750,000 or $1 million mortgages on houses that only have $250,000 worth of flood coverage. Homeowners doesn't touch it if it just gets wet. So you get a $250,000 check, you need to do $700,000 worth of repairs on the house, and he won't let you. And now you're sitting in a house that's been flooded to the roof line, all your stuff is gone, your mortgage holder has your $250,000 flood insurance check, and they're telling you as soon as you can find a contractor who will put the house back together, we'll pay him. I got a ton of clients that are stuck in that spot right now. So now the mortgage companies are going, no, now you have to have flood insurance and you have to have additional flood. You have to buy an additional flood policy to cover the cost of the mortgage. And places like Lloyd's of London and State Farm and Allstate are going, sure, it's $45,000 a year because your house is below the base flood. You're high risk. So it's not just a question now of, do we want to continue perpetuating the cycle? If we don't start getting these people, forcing these people to build up and get out of this every opportunity we get to do it, they're going to hit a spot where they can't insure the house. No matter what. We won't be the one that tells them they can't be in the house. They're simply not going to be able to buy them. Their mortgage holder is going to tell them to get out.
Well, after so many claims, what's the claim amount?
Right now, the claim amount is for 50% of the structural value of the building. So when they go through to reassess you, if you're below base flood and you take an event, when they go to renew you, if the $12,000 cap doesn't meet the risk, the actuary risk of what you should be at, then they're going to look at how many claims you've had. And if you're in a repetitive loss area and you're high risk and they can't get an adequate premium out of you, they will not renew you.
And so in that case,
they're out. You're either getting private insurance.
well, if you have a mortgage, for one, and they take away your flood insurance,
They call the note.
call the note, right?
Or they'll go get you flood insurance. So that's what the mortgage companies are doing. It's like, oh no, we'll go get your flood insurance. Lloyd's of London said $24,000 a year.
And of course, if you can't pay that, then
And who can pay that mortgage, right? So they're going to get out. This is awful, right? They're going to be leaving these houses anyway.
right. And I'd
One way or another, because the environment, the real environment is changing, and the insurance climate, the insurance environment is changing very rapidly. So we have to play a balance game between how aggressively do we want to stop them from continuing to rebuild in a flood zone with the compassion of not trying to kick people out into the street, but also getting this wrapped up as rapidly as we can so that we don't keep dealing with it and people don't just keep dealing with it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to see anybody kicked out of their house, and I don't want to see people not be able to rebuild their house. Why I got into this industry in the first place, because it was the cheapest way to keep people keep their houses, but still all of this.
But there's grant programs that you very eloquently, that literally gave me chills when you said that we could be the showcase.
Yeah, I really like that statement.
I really did get physical chills. I was like, that would be really cool. But
We
so
have
there
been
are
having-
options for these people that you know, that might get kicked out. But there are options to get them even prior to an event, correct?
Yeah.
Grants, these grants are
Yes.
granted even
They
prior to
don't
an
have to
event.
wait for
So
an
there are
event.
options for these people.
There's both kinds of grants.
Obviously, we're doing this team over here, plus the rest of the team that's with them is doing a real great job in educating our citizens for this program. So
And when we
I
reached
commend
the-
you guys and whoever else, the rest of you guys for doing that.
When we
because
reached
that's
out
really
to
good.
FDM for guidance on this, they jumped right on it.
Yeah.
Because kind of piggyback what Mike was saying, they're interested.
Yeah.
And just to give you a little insight, this is the desktop manual for substantial improvement. And it says right here, the purpose of the substantial improvement, substantial damage requirements is to protect the property owner's investment and safety, and over time to reduce the total number of buildings that are exposed to flood damage, thus reducing the burden on taxpayers through the payment of disaster assistance. That's why they're making things as stringent as they are. And by us putting this in there, we as a city, and myself as a building official and Veronica as my floodplain, we're not going and saying, we want you out of your house.
Right.
Like Mr. Frey said, the insurance companies are going to tell you that. The mortgage companies are going to tell you that. But we're trying to put things in place so this don't happen.
Right.
So some of these folks can, and it's not going to hit everybody. Some people are just not going to be able to do it. Eventually,
But
you're
we
going
can
to
guide them.
weed yourself
We
out.
can
But we
help
can
them,
guide,
we
yeah.
can guide them to the grants, to the different programs that are out there for funding purposes. There are other avenues.
Okay.
So the NRDC, they released a report that it actually talks about how the threshold actually does give credit. They said few communities utilize, FEMA data has identified 25 communities receiving credit for less than a 50% threshold, and 32 communities receiving credit for a regulatory threshold that is no more than 25%. So that, I think that definitely does play into the 40%. So, I mean, if the NRDC is putting out this data, I mean, it's an official government organization.
They get credit for 150. What was the other thing of 25?
32 communities. FEMA identified 32 communities receiving credit for a regulatory threshold that is no more than 25%.
So it might be a 20, it may be in.
Once you get to 25,
Or it may be, that's something that they'll just need to see where that slide is.
we need to be very specific on what benefit we get for that. Because while as things move forward, insurance makes it difficult. I don't want to be the first in line to push people out either if there's no benefit for it.
It's not pushing people out. It's making sure that their homes are
safe.
I can't believe that
We're giving him guidance, right? That's what this ordinance does. This ordinance gives him guidance. This is why we don't have robots do it all, right? I mean, he's still the compassion behind the statement. So we set the statement at 40%, and he goes in and he looks at everything, and he has the ability to go in and go, all right, this is really, really close. This is close. This is, we can exclude this. We can exclude this. Right, he has that ability to do that.
Say it again, he can exclude what?
He can there's things within the code that he can exclude that are things that are cosmetic. Like he said, when FEMA writes that number, so like Lee County adopted the FEMA version of it, which is like an assessment of the knickknacks that you're planning on buying that were in here pre-storm that were damaged. They're all going.
They throw everything in.
They throw everything in.
He might exclude.
He can simply go in and go, paint, I don't care about the paint.
On a normal remodel improvement or something like that. But if in a matter of an event, no,
All bets are off there.
all bets are off.
Yeah,
Because that all has to be tracked through FEMA.
gotcha.
Yeah. So, but he has the ability. It's on him to, especially for people who are pulling a homeowner's permit to try and put it back together themselves. They're going in there and they're going, I can do it for $8. And he's going, guideline says that it's going to cost you $80,000. And he can find, there's a middle in there, right? He gets some leeway on, okay, well, we're putting it back to pre-storm damage. Well, brand new cabinets have a higher value than pre-storm cabinets had. So there's an assessment for, okay, well, you have to pay that to put these new cabinets in, but there's some deterioration. He can play that game to keep compassion in the city, in things that go in. But it also gives him the ability that when an investor comes in here and goes, I can do it for $8, he can go, no, you're not.
Yeah, I get it.
No, you can buy it, you can lift, but you're going to lift it. You're going to put all new windows in it. It's going to be a compliant home when we're done. Because like he was reading, the goal here is not just, we don't want to kick people out. We don't want to create ordinances that prevent people from living here. We also have a requirement to make sure that, again, government's here to make sure people don't make bad decisions sometimes.
Here to help.
Huh?
That's right.
Government said I'm here to help.
There's a lot of people that just went in and dropped $100,000 into putting their house back together that may wash away next year.
Yep.
Right? There are people all over the place that are dropping. One of the things that people can do, and this is something that they'll still have the ability to do, everybody's taxable value, thank God, everybody's taxable value, because the property appraiser is a little light usually. Your taxable value is not what your house is worth, right? It's usually a lot lower. You have the right, that comes in, to go get a private appraiser to give you a private appraisal of what that house is actually worth pre-storm, what that house was worth pre-storm.
Yeah, so that's an interesting concept there too. How does that play into, because obviously anybody who's homesteaded, their house grows exponentially pretty much, right? Such waterfront property and all that, but it's very, very protected. I think 3% max a year. So obviously whatever value's out there is very suppressed. It could be extremely suppressed.
Correct. So you have the ability to go in and go, no, my house is worth, this is happening in Fort Myers. You can get a private appraisal that says, no, the house is worth $1.7 million. It's a double-edged sword. If you hand the property appraiser a document that says your house is worth $1.7 million, he'll give you a permit to put the house back together. Guess what next year's tax bill is going to look like?
Yeah, and they adjust that so that falls outside the state home. So if you have appraisal,
You prove
it into it.
wrong, he will absolutely push that bar up where it belongs, right? So there's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And we do that now. We've had several residents who have come in who have exceeded or was really close to being right over the threshold. And we've offered them that, and they have come back.
Yeah.
And they met the threshold. Having the private appraisals done. We've had several of those happen.
So everybody wants to work with trying to keep these people where they are and give them the ability to do this. But that's one of those things where you go, you shouldn't, you should lift it. And they go, no, I'm putting my house back together. And like, okay, but you're going to have to, it's going to hurt. Because it's going to cost you $300,000 to put your house back together, and you're going to have to prove that you can. And that's kind of our way of going, look, we tried to lead you away from the fire, and you just wanted to jump into it anyway. This community's already got a bunch of people out there that just put a lot of money into a lot of ground floor homes, and the reality is, it's a dice roll. You know, I tell clients all the time, I'm like, hurricane season is very simple. You pull a pin on a grenade June 1st, and you set it in a glass, and you put it on the front porch, and you hope it never goes off. And then in November, you put the pin back in it, and you put it back in the box.
And
It's coming, right?
our job as city council also to prepare what is, right? And the government and all of the organizations that do all of the research to make sure that we keep the citizens safe, which is one of our top priorities.
It is.
Financially even sometimes, right? Don't put $300,000 in this, it's gonna get wet next year. No, I'm gonna put it back together. I hear a lot.
I tried to rebuild my house. I tried to elevate it twice, and I had to help me twice. 1994, qualified. They decided to not give me the funds to do it then. And then in 2019, I went through a whole bunch of expense, having an architect draw plans. I came in and talked to Dallas and what was required to build the house, got the code. Went back to FEMA, showed them this is what we're going to do. I got a letter from them where I was approved for at least a minimum of $150,000 towards a new structure.
Right.
So I went to demo my house and get a permit, and then they told me that they gave the money to somebody out by the expressway.
So the grant program is,
COVID came, so now the house still sits there. So I've been trying
right.
for several years to do that, and
Well, and I have people in the grant program, we got 4 this year. 2 of them were people that I wrote in the 2021 cycle, which is what this is. These are 2021 dollars that are coming in this year. And 2 of them were people that I wrote in 2018 and 2019, and they kept getting rolled because they will, Pasco County will qualify 35, 40 people, and then they'll rank them as the highest risk, and then they wait to see what FDEM gives them for a budget every year. That's why I'm saying that we do have the possibility to try to get on the radar more for them to FDEM, because FEMA gets a big list and they go through everything for FMA and for HMGP, and Congress goes, we're going to throw $61 billion at flood mitigation this year. And then it gets divvied up to the states that all asked for money, and then the state department, FDEM, decides where it's going to go. FDEM is not going to, like, Hillsborough County is huge. They have way more waterfront than Pasco County will ever have, and way more money. Davis Island, all those places down there, they went into HMGP after the storm hit when they opened it, which is Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. That's what happens after a storm. They applied for HMGP money. They got $700,000 to fix their traffic lights. They didn't even open the program to their citizens at all. I'm trying to write 2 FMA grants and Swift Current grants over there for them right now, and Hillsborough County simply doesn't want to be involved. Their citizens have no choice. Miami-Dade does not have a flood coordinator that will write a grant program. Palm Beach County does not have one. These are multi-billion-dollar counties when it comes to their waterfront. We have the ability to set the bar.
I got a question for you. You have a family here in Port Richey that qualifies for a 2,500 square foot house. FDM qualifies it to have their house have you lift it, and they have, say, a 9, 8, 12 pitch roof, tall roof, 10-foot ceilings, and you go to elevate it to the current FEMA standards. The house qualifies, but with the new standards, the roof's too high. It's over the maximum structure elevation.
So that's when we get in with the P&Z. So if it's it would have to be a 2-story structure to exceed the maximum building height. It would already have to be a 2-story structure because we can get 35 feet right now. And that's to mean high tide. Our code is to mean roof line. So you got a monster roof, it's still here. So we draw from eave to peak. We draw a midline in our building code. That's how our building code reads. So it's from base flood elevation to mean roof middle. You get 35 feet. You can get a lot of house in there because remember, your base flood is somewhere in the middle of the garage.
Depends on how high the property is, I guess.
Right. But if the property is really high, then I'd only need to go up 3 feet.
When you got 10-foot ceilings, that's not going to be a 2-story house unless you got 6-foot living area.
Well, but remember that height that you have to elevate to is above the mean high tide line. It's above NAVD. So if you have a 9-foot or 10-foot elevation on the building or on the property, and I only have to go to 12, I only need 3 feet to the first living floor.
So if they want to elevate their house to 9 feet so they can have a parking garage underneath, you say, no, the maximum height's too high, you can only have 5 feet under.
So right now I'm writing that, I've been helping write that code in Treasure Island. They're rewriting their code to say that they can violate the maximum building height because they're raising grade. Theirs is above grade. But like, I mean, my house is 3 stories high, and it's 10-foot ceilings in the garage and 12 feet per floor. I have 2 living floors above that and a roof deck, and I don't exceed the mean height requirement. And I'm in an elevation 11 on Miller's Bayou. So I needed to go 6.5 feet above the grade. I was at 5 feet. I need at the time when we built it. So, but I went to 10 because I wanted 10-foot ceilings in the garage. So I have 10-foot ceilings, 2-foot box trusses, 12-foot ceilings, 2-foot box trusses, 12-foot ceilings, and my mean roof was right at the line.
5 feet?
At 35 feet above base flood.
You don't measure it from the grade.
You don't measure from grade, you measure from base flood.
Right.
Measure from that base flood.
So 5 feet, and my base flood and the freeboard put me, I was already starting, my zero was starting 8 feet up.
So, I'm sorry, so can I get back to this? So what are you asking for? You're asking for direction for what to do? This is very important. This is very important and a lot of great information. But we've got another large topic to look at here. So no, you're fine. I have learned a lot, and I appreciate everything that you have said. So I truly do.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Wealth of information for sure.
Yes.
What we would be requesting is council direct the city attorney to put these into the proper format to amend the city codes.
Does it need to be a motion, or does it just need
No, it's just
direction?
direction.
Well, I think the 2-foot freeboard is a kind of no-brainer.
Right.
I don't know. That's my opinion.
On that, very quickly, same thing. Again, if a block is 8, right, a foot is what FEMA has. We really can't go a foot above that. We're going to go a foot. 2 feet. We're going to be, well, no, it's a foot and a half. We'll be a foot and a half. So we're really going to be above that. Is there any point difference if we just
block and a half block? They do 12 inch, and they also make a 12 inch block.
But you're,
We're already at 1 foot. We're going to go another foot.
all right?
I mean that's the construction piece of it. That I don't
Well, it's
think
expense. So if it's
There's a lot of
that's-
different.
well, but
that's built into the.
But remember that you may be starting at 5 or 5.3 feet or 6.2. Like the ground is variable
Right.
by in anything. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about the increments on that, because a lot of times you're building to block heights.
Right. So it's 1 foot or 2 foot, whichever we choose to do, above the mean floodlet.
Above the base flood, yeah,
So, I mean, you could be here below, or you could be here.
correct.
So it's just the 2 foot above the base.
we're adding a foot. We already have to be
You're
a foot.
adding a foot.
Right. We already have one. So do we agree on 2 foot for
Yes.
the freeboard?
Fine.
Yes. No. Maybe.
Yes. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And then what was the next thing we're looking at? We're looking at the substantial damage. We're at 50% right now. So what's everybody's idea?
Yeah, so I want to clarify something for you all, because I sense that you felt I was being irrational or whatever. So I'm all about safety. All right. It's strictly questions, because whatever we set that threshold, there will come a time when it forces that person to make a decision that they may not be able to make.
That's going to happen already.
Well, I get that, and the reality is that none of us are safe now. So if that was the total goal, we don't need to set at 40. We just set it at 0. If you have an event, raise it. Follow me? So whatever, there's a balance, as you stated. Is it 40? Is it 45? Is it 30? Is it 20? I don't know what that is, but the closer it gets to 0, the less ability to give to a homeowner to fix their property.
So what's your suggestion?
Well, so obviously, if there's a bigger CRS benefit, the lower we go.
There
That
is.
translate well, unless we get to 25. I don't know if it's based on.
No, it says here that
Give me-
FEMA data identifies 25 communities receiving credit for less than a 50% threshold.
Right, less than 50%. Is that 49, 48, 40? Is it?
It doesn't say, that's,
You
I'm
get,
looking at it.
if you are below 50, you get credit. I
Right.
totally get that. But how far below 50 do you get any more credit? And if you don't, all we're doing is bringing that threshold lower so that this person can't put money in their current home without raising it.
And that's based on a property appraisal, not actual.
If they decide to do that, right? So there's a lot of things in play there that can monkey with that, but I get that. Again,
It does make it more difficult for homeowners to be able to do it the less it is.
Right.
But the whole point of this is for a safer home to be raised. So, and I looked through FEMA's website, and I also looked through the desktop there, the book on substantial improvement. It doesn't give you a time, nor does it say these are the points that you'll gain. You'll gain points, CRS points, if you're more stringent than what FEMA says.
Right.
That's all it says. It doesn't direct you as to what percentage. Like I said, one of our coworkers, we reached out to Fernandina Beach, and they're at 30%. Why? Because they're more coastal. So they're making it more stringent to keep that from happening.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really up to you.
Right.
There's nothing, I can do a little bit more research and find out and talk and see. I already sent a couple emails to FDEM as well to see if they can guide me on that, but I haven't seen anything. So
I would be more inclined to not go as low as 40, 45. I think would be a good compromise. I was
So
thinking
that's why I was asking, what was your suggestion?
I mean,
45?
45 would probably be better than 40, obviously. And then,
Every year?
are you still going to keep it to the year?
Every
or are
year,
you
every
gonna
2
open
year,
it
every
up to
5
again, if there's no benefit from a CRS perspective, I would keep it the same.
How does FEMA look at it? Obviously 10 years
Don't
would be
just look at it from a CRS credit standpoint.
So say
Kind of
again,
like
Mike, I'm
what we
sorry.
were talking about as well. Don't just look at CRS points.
Okay.
Yes, that's one caveat of it.
Okay.
But you also have to look at, if we keep it at 1 year,
Uh-huh.
you're doing 45% this year, 45% this year, 45% this year, 45%. If FEMA is paying out all these years, you're eventually going to be pushed out by FEMA or by your insurance company because they're not going to do it anymore.
But it's not your government pushing you out.
It's a
Technically,
different
so
aspect.
if
Well,
it's FEMA,
not this government.
but even though you put it at the 45, what we're doing now is you can also go in and get another appraisal. The cost of your property is going to increase, and it's going to be more than what's on the property appraisers now. To kind of come off of this a little bit, in the current building code and existing codes, we live in a high windborne debris area. It is in your code that you have to have either storm shutters or you have to have impact rated glass. Under existing codes, under the existing building code, if you want to go into, Miss Linda, if you want to go and change the windows out in your house and they are not impact rated right now, you can change 25% of your windows. Say you have 12, you can change 3 of your windows this year to regular single pane glass, don't have to do anything. Next year, you can do the same thing. Within 4 years, you're going to have all your windows replaced in your house, and not one of them is impact rated. So the first storm you get that's going to chuck somebody's fence board through it is going to blow a hole in your house. Those winds are going to come in and lift your roof right off the house. Same kind of different scenario here. If we keep allowing folks to keep sinking thousands and thousands and thousands of their money into this house, they're eventually going to run out. They're not going to have that ability to do it anymore. And I want to reiterate, because it's on the record, I'm not about throwing anybody out of their house.
Nobody is.
I want everybody to be safe. I want everybody to regain their investment on their property and not have to walk away from it.
Correct.
We have a couple of those in the city now that are in this particular situation. And I feel bad for them, but it's out of my hands. I can't do anything
Were
with
they
it.
aware of it when they did
Yeah.
it? Were they told? Did
They
they get
were
a
made
memo
aware of it.
when they pulled the permit? Because they had to get a permit to do whatever they did. right?
No, they have enough damage on their property now that it exceeds their levels. And they don't have the money to go in there and redo it. Insurance companies are dropping them. Mortgage company is going to pull a note on one of them.
Yeah, this is a double-edged sword, and that's all we're trying to say. Where do we want to be? Do we want to be the bad guy in this scenario, or do we want to try to ease up on this safety point? Definitely drop it below 50, but do we want to go as far as 40, or do we hold that?
45.
45,
It should
yeah.
be a year because,
Or maybe
I
every
mean, people
2
need to
years.
make that decision themselves.
And I
They're
think you're on the
worried.
right path. 45 splits it.
That's
We're
a
at
bigger,
50, we're at 40. It
it's
gives us
easier
that.
to measure that.
But, and you don't have to go 5 years. Go 3 years.
Right, I was gonna say
Do
2 or
three
3 years,
Yeah.
yeah.
What did you gave a couple examples of the time frame, and Newport Richie was one of them, I think.
It's
There-
5 years?
Was it a 5 or 2? Yeah. Pasco, go ahead and read those again.
Pasco's 49.
Ferdinand Beach is 30% every year.
Wow.
Madeira Beach is 50% through 10 years, unless you have 2 flood events.
Right.
And then you're done.
Oh, you're
Newport
done.
Richie is 50% in 5 years. Seminole County is 50% in 5 years. Pasco County is 49 in 1 year. But like I said, most of the flood issues is individual cities. So it really doesn't matter to Pasco that much because the cities are going to be eating that
Newport
stuff up.
Richie and Port Richie is the bulk of the floods.
And see, and they're at 49% in 5 years.
Yeah. And we're probably realistically more vulnerable than they are.
And I just want to confirm with you that that does not consider repetitive cumulative repair work or cumulative damage over time. Right?
It does.
The percentage, it says there are 2 critical shortcomings of the current FEMA SI/SD definition. And one of those is that the regulatory definitions of substantial improvement and substantial damage do not consider repetitive cumulative repair work or cumulative damage over time. And that's from the NRDC, which again is a
So explain what exactly that's saying. When you talk about cumulative,
The damage.
we're talking about
doesn't
time
count.
frame, right? So in this case, the 40, this use our current 50% 1 year. If it's 50% this year, the clock resets next year. If it's 50% now, we get in it and we have another event within the year, then you're over. So what is that saying about the cumulative not? How do you explain that?
There's 2 different pieces. Substantial improvement and substantial damage are different things. So substantial improvement is I want to build an addition. There's been no event.
Right, no thing.
I want to build an addition. Typically, most municipalities read that as we're going to be cumulative on substantial improvement. So over the course of substantial improvement within building code, because Florida building code has its own thresholds, not ignoring the flood hazard. Substantial improvement is a place where he can go, well, you've done a lot of stuff over the last 5 years. No, now you've made this a $1 million house in a flood zone.
So is that in the event thing what really matters?
That's substantial damage.
Substantial damage.
So is that up to the city's discretion whether we include substantial improvements in that? No,
No, FEMA's going to take whatever it is based on that
on the event.
Yeah.
So that
But they're still going to
House
track
at the time of the
repetitive
event.
loss.
right.
They're still going to track the repetitive loss. So
Again,
that's,
Different pieces.
That's different though.
Yeah, they're different pieces. Repetitive loss is going to go for insurance.
I do a remodel, right? Not event, do
No
a
event.
remodel.
Yep.
And let's say I reach my 50%.
Yep.
And then there's event. 2 things can happen. 50%, or the event says, no, you already used your 50%. You're done.
No, so FEMA's not going to look at the remodel for the substantial damage because what they're looking at is at the day before the event, what was the value of the structure? And what's it going to cost to get it back to that thing?
But what you're saying is you look at it from the fact of is you won't issue anything. So once I get to that remodel, I'm at that 50%, and I want to add something that takes me above that. You say, no, you can't do anything else. You got to raise your home.
Well, and the substantial improvement side has typically the way it runs is because a lot of people will go, that's fine, I'll just do phase 1 and phase 2. No, you have to complete a project. And then you have 12 calendar, it's from that day of completion of the permit. You have 12 months before you can pull the next
Right.
the next permit to do another whatever, and you get out of that, depending on where that is. But so there are two different things. There's substantial damage is just looking at that event, no cumulative. Now, it's read different by every municipality. Cape Coral had a 5-year look back on anything, and they had to go into a special session and rescind it. So Cape Coral and Lee County both pulled back their 5-year and said, we're not going to look at anything, because it was pretty much going to dump everybody in the entire town out of their house. So again, we're not carving these on tablets, right? You guys, in the event of an event like that, if we have a catastrophic level 12-foot storm surge, and you guys want to revamp the way he enforces things, you can, right? But just understand that if you're getting CRS ratings for the things that you've changed and you roll them back later, you're going to have issues with your CRS rating is going to jump way, way, way back up if you have to roll them back later. So I think again, it's the scales. Right?
And reality is, say you do a remodel or whatever, that first year, and you do something else, and eventually you raise that becomes your.
Right. In the ideal, you get up before.
Ideally, you put it up before you do any of that, because you could be investing for naught.
Well, and so a lot of times that's a solution, right? In some places before there's a storm, I have clients that call me all the time that are like, I really want to put an addition on the house, and they won't let me because it would exceed the 50% rule in the flood hazard zone. Mm-hmm. But I can lift their existing home and then build new footprint on the back of it in new structure, and then we can go through and build all the addition that they want on top of that afterwards, because the building official's like, I don't care what you're doing, you're out of the flood zone. Sounds great, right? And so that's a big deal. That's the other part of lifting things, and why you try to make codes better is because lifting things, you don't have to go through and change all the windows and do all that stuff. People that pop the top off and build a new structure on top of it, they have to put all new everything in. Right, so we want to make it as easy as possible for people to elevate and get out of the flood zone, but we also want to put enough teeth in the code to make them have to, so they don't just keep doing it. And again, the bigger problem is it's typically not the little lady who's on a fixed income that happened to get wet. He's not going to go in there and try and throw that lady out. He's going to find every rule he possibly can to let her be able to stay in her home. But we want the teeth in the code to be able to allow him to tell the investor that just came in and bought 6 flooded homes, you're not putting them back together.
Right.
You're putting them in the air.
So, I mean, I'm okay with the 1 year. I guess I'm okay with 2 years as well. I don't know if I want to grow that out, because again, it becomes, especially since we're already below 50, the longer time frame you stretch it out, the less you're able to do.
95% of the people that make an improvement of 45%. So you're going to put in addition, close a porch and make a bedroom out of it. You're going to spend a $150,000 house. You're going to spend $65,000 and close that bedroom. Are you going to do it again next year? Not likely. You might never do it again, but it'll probably be 5 years before you make any kind of improvement like that again, if you even do it. So the time frame is not that big of an issue, I don't think, as far as improvements. The 45% is
well, depending on the shape and what you want to do. But
45% is a bigger issue.
By doing all of this, we're keeping our residents safe as well as ourselves, and we're also decreasing the amount of money that all of the residents will pay for their home insurance, homeowners, and flood insurance.
You're right.
By doing that. So,
but
we have programs in place with the grant program. We obviously are using them very well. We have advocates for that program. I think the 2-foot freeboard, we've agreed on that. I think going 3 years, we can change it. If we get to a major event, as he just said, we can change it and as a council and say no. But using the example that Mike gave, I could go and change windows a couple at a time, and then I'm still not going to be safe. So what's the whole point? I mean, the whole point is to keep, we as the government, as the council, our job is to keep them safe. Not to kick them out of the house, but to keep them safe. We're not making people do this. This is if there's an event or if they want to do more things. That's our job. We have to look at the 3,000 residents and all of our residents. I also do not want to kick anybody out. I'm staying in my house forever. So there.
I personally think, we just saw a presentation from the Port Authority that showed what could happen. And to operate and to believe that couldn't happen, in my opinion, is very short-sighted.
Well, actually, it will happen. I would venture to say it will happen at some point. When? Could be tomorrow. Could be 100 years from now.
But I think that we
So
have
that's
to opt.
September and twice in December.
Well, like I said, the sooner we can get these houses elevated, the better. If we have an opportunity to do that, we need to move
So-
as fast as we can.
And looking at becoming a model city to do that, I think that has a lot of benefit.
If it's realistic, yeah.
Yeah.
Let them finish.
So, and for me, when I saw that presentation and I saw the entire bayou completely underwater, I'm sorry. I think that a 2-foot thing, a 40%, I think that this kind of thing, we don't want that to happen.
No.
And we don't want our citizens to be underwater, and we don't want them to potentially die, which is way worse than having to fight insurance companies or having to get you all to help them look for grants. That's peace compared to them potentially losing their lives because we might not have prepared for an event that could possibly happen.
Well, the best preparation for an event like that is to people to listen to what the officials here are saying. Get the hell out, because there wasn't that kind of evacuation that should have occurred,
And that's
and
also,
people should have actually been moving in that direction and did not.
and a lot of people can't. You know, just because a thing says, oh, well, everybody has to get out. What about people who have no car? What about people who are too elderly and can't move? I mean, wasn't there an old man who was rescued after the flood? Who was in a bed?
So we have been in communication with Pasco County through emergency management where they do have buses in place now. And the last storm, I myself had gotten in one of the trucks and drove around and knocked on people's doors and asked if there was anybody disabled or handicapped or on oxygen or that needed, because there is, Pasco County does have a system in place for that. And this is really good because we would like to get more workshops and more literature, more education out there to the public so that they are aware that it does exist. There are things out there that we can let them know about that they may not be aware of. But there is to bring that, because there are a lot of citizens that don't drive, elderly, and there is something in place for that where they will come and pick them up.
That's
So
amazing.
there are different avenues. There's a lot more happening today than there was 5 years ago. And there's a lot more things in place.
I'm glad we're having this conversation because when my neighborhood was flooded, everybody came out and helped one another. And this is a good way to build community relationships with your neighbors so that you should know everybody around you. And if somebody does have a need, to be able to somehow address it and communicate that. So I don't know what we can do, but I'd like to see some kind of program where we all work together to build that kind of
Well,
relationship.
he had
Yeah.
one of his guys with FEMA doing a presentation. Mike was. If you guys could do a video like that, a presentation, some of his videos of him actually elevating houses and the results, and present the benefits of what we're trying to do to the citizens. Send out mail outs, so they just click on this link on their TV or the computer and they can watch that video. And it explains to them what we're doing and how they can benefit from this program. It'll be a long video, just an educational one.
Well, the bottom line is we need some kind of time frame. Sounds like we're all in agreement that 1 year, maybe we should be more strict than that. 5 years, I think sounds like is too much. I heard 3, I heard 2. So why don't where are you at on the time frame?
2, 3, it doesn't matter to me because
Give me 1.
3.
2, I'm at 2.
45. 45.
45.
I'm with 3.
45%.
Oh yeah, 45. I think we already agreed on
got that.
45.
Yeah.
I didn't agree with that. I didn't.
Well, I think we had consensus at 45. Again, we'll
And you can argue this again. Remember that this is
Yeah.
just direction to
Right,
get us to the
direction.
next topic,
Yes.
and we can get
So
something
it sounded
back
like
officially.
we had a consensus on 45, maybe not total agreement. So you said 2,
45 to 2 or 3. 45 to 3.
3, 2, 2.
3.
Great.
Okay, so 3.
You'll see something in the future.
One other question I'd like, that do you know if you go from 1 to 2 to 3, if there's any incremental benefit or not?
I don't know. We're going to reach out
Yeah.
and we'll
Yeah.
try and have that
And
information for you on the next
my
one.
guess is that there is not a
Yeah.
difference.
No.
So somewhere, yeah. But definitely below 45, 50. That's
If
where
you're
the
below 50,
next
you get
step is.
something,
Yeah.
and it doesn't appear that there is any from 1 year to whatever.
And that's what I kind of looked at earlier is right now, based on just what I have,
Right.
there's a potential of 490 points. Now, does it say if I go to 49, we get 6 points? We go to 48, we get 7. It doesn't give me that.
Right.
It doesn't break that down. We have to reach out to one of the ISO reps to have
You're
him
not going to get second
maybe
mortgages.
break that down for us.
Make improvements that often.
Right.
You're just not going to do it.
Okay. Is there any other questions on that?
No, I think that's good.
Next up is item number 3, discussion on open storage use in commercial and industrial zoning districts. I'll pass that to Mr. Koppler
Thank you
for
very
action. Thanks, Mike.
So, conversation number 3 on this. At the last meeting, we talked quite a bit about the definitions. I think maybe changing a little bit of the focus tonight away from the definitions and maybe going to the second piece that I had brought up as a secondary question, which is, do you want to allow outdoor storage in commercial 3, commercial 2, or actually commercial 3 areas? That's probably a better conversation to have, because I think, again, the definitions are very malleable and can be changed going forward. But really the policy piece that I think needs to be addressed is that, do you want to allow open storage in C3?
If I may jump in to add to that, because remember, this is kind of a directional. This is going to go to P&Z per your code. That's what should happen. So we just kind of need direction. So yes, the definitions are something that definitely there's some conversation to still have about them should we get there. But right now, it's just, do you want, like Mr. Koppler said, do you want this? Where do you want it? Do you not want it? So we can get it to P&Z and start working that process.
So as we had a lot of discussion on this in the last council meeting, and I felt like that we were mostly in agreement. So I'll just ask, where are you at on outdoor storage in a commercial 3? For or against?
I'm for it if it's done right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm for it as well.
I'm for it if it's done right with certain stipulations.
Sure.
Right.
How you feel?
In the C3, it just doesn't make us look good on our main corridor. So I kind of have a problem with that.
Okay.
So I'm not for it.
Sure. And so with that, sounds like we have consensus.
Yes.
Outdoor storage C3. A couple on the, I don't know if you need any more, but on the, if it's done right, if we could elaborate a little on that.
Well, I think you can have outdoor storage in a commercial area 500 feet from a residential area. However,
They're going to caution you about
if it's in-
the whole buffering thing is a whole other conversation.
Okay, well, then, I mean, yeah, it's got to be done right as far as.
And the reason I'm I asked that, so if we're talking about outdoor storage versus a something else we have in C3, yes, are you saying that the buffering should be different from an outdoor storage than it would be from just another use, like a car lot?
Well, yeah, well, it needs to be, car lots need to have some guidelines too. I see cars parked all over the place.
Again, there's a buffering between, you're talking about residential and commercial, right?
Right.
So there's and maybe, again, I think we need to look at that separately, because that's.
I've seen outdoor storages done really nice, and it's not expensive. It's not a big deal, but it's presented as it falls in line with the other structures and businesses on the road in the area. Just by just putting a fascia, painting windows and bushes and putting bushes in the front, it looks like a regular building. or a regular business, but it's got a sliding gate. It opens and you can pull in and out, and it's storage behind it.
Maybe we can do this. I knew that the buffers were a big point you made last time. We can look at that.
Right.
See what buffers we have.
You know, we'll look at it and see. So when it comes back, we'll have those answers. Maybe
Right.
it's already addressed in another section, or we need to add it to the
That's why I'm
section.
like, well, you
So,
know,
but I
you
think
know,
we understand the concerns you had.
I will bring up one thing that's a little different from that. On the definition of outdoor storage yard and lot. This is the definition that we had in the industrial zoning, correct?
The
Industrial zone, yeah.
italicized piece is what was in
Yes.
currently in there.
Which is what's what I'm focused on. So provided that such outdoor storage yard shall not be located closer than 25 feet to any public street or closer than 75 feet to any portion of a lot located within a residential district. So I'm assuming that may be somewhat more strict than the buffering. I'd like to see what the difference between that is. But the reason it's called out is probably because it's more strict, I would
I would
guess.
imagine.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to see what that is.
Let me just say that buffering is a different concept than what that's not talking about buffering.
Right.
That's talking about distance.
Well,
Buffering.
well, distance.
And then there's a 6 feet
buffer.
high solid fence.
I understand what you're saying, but again, buffering has, in planning, zoning, words matter. And so buffering is not necessarily a distance away. Buffering is what you put in between uses.
Trees, fences.
So
walls.
that's why in this particular definition, it's called out that way, because you wouldn't find in a buffering section of the code that uses have to be a certain distance apart. What they would say is you'd have to have a wall that's 6 foot tall, or you have to have certain types of trees. So buffering is not a distance per se, and usually it's in some of the special parts of the code that go along with zoning that starts talking about what those buffers or what those distances between uses need to be. So I understand what you're saying,
Right.
but
Well, yeah.
it means something different.
We
in
both
zoning.
make sense.
Yes.
And I want to say too that anytime you have commercial abutting residential, there's normally some kind of wall, solid fencing requirement, which I wonder why that's called out here. Other than the fact that they want it, if it's in industrial, they want it actually enclosed. It doesn't matter about the. Well, I think is it residential.
Yeah,
Located within
again, I
residential
think
district.
they're trying to set this is trying to set a tone of what a resident would be looking at if you were, because what I think this is anticipating is you have this side of the street is residential, this side of the street is commercial, and so what is that residential piece going to be looking at? And
Right.
so it's going a little bit more than just, again, not buffering, because there is a distance behind it.
Well, 75 feet is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As an example, over there by the Apple 6 property, that property is only about 150 feet wide. So that's half their property is.
And so with this, keep in mind that right now, the only place you have outdoor storage yard and lot is in an industrial use. So again, they're trying to make it more strict. So you have that industrial quote unquote use further away and protected from a residential. I really think that when we look at this as it relates to a commercial use, that we're probably going to have to change what those distances are just because of the size of the lots.
Yeah.
So understand that applying outdoor storage yard and lot to a C3 may have a different definition, especially on those distances.
And we're going to discuss that after zoning gets done with it.
Yeah, I really think that's where, as staff, we should probably bounce a lot of these ideas off of them to get, their take on it, to make that recommendation to you.
And that was the one thing we needed to get direction on is C3 having outdoor storage. And so the only other part of this is if these definitions are good, right?
I would say not necessarily. I think, and of course, that's the man in charge. But if we know the direction is that there is a desire in C3, I think it goes to planning and zoning with that direction, and they begin that process. And it obviously comes to you, and you can change or agree to what they've done. But I think planning and zoning is the place that starts.
Right. So
After your direction. Now, your direction is you want outdoor storage, and C3, let them figure out what to do with that.
but these definitions, you don't need those.
I think at this point, planning and zoning does that.
Can
part.
cover that. Okay. Do they need that?
But the city manager may want something different. So.
Yeah. So I think again, these are starting points. And once it gets to P and Z, they're probably going to change there, is my guess, or they're going to say they're great. Either way. But I think the only issue I see is that, none of these contemplate being in a C3, the outdoor storage yard lot. So we're going to have to look at that a little bit differently than what's currently there.
Well, the one I had concerns with is the general storage establishment, because it says usually consists of a large enclosed structure, right? So that would be, if it usually consists, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to, right? And I think the current interpretation is that it has to, right? So that was one thing I want to point out there. And another issue I saw with bulk storage yard, it states storage of large quantities of raw materials or bulk goods. Again, what's large quantity? And I use the example of a landscaping place where you go get rock, mulch, different things. You might have a certain amount of mulch, a certain amount of this rock, a certain amount of this rock. What's a large quantity at that point?
That would be a landscaping business.
Right, but again, so that wouldn't count as a bulk storage. So when you say bulk storage, you're just talking about where the stuff is stored, not in the business.
Right. So the ancillary use of that lot for landscaping would include storage of materials that they use within their
Like
That's their
the pipe,
accessory use.
the
right?
pipe manufacturing company over on Leo Kid, they got all those pipes stacked up inside their fenced-in area. That's bulk
Yeah.
storage.
Well, I guess that was just a large quantity. What maybe a large quantity of Mike might be different from me, might be different from Dave. So I don't know if that causes the problem. I just point that out.
More than a wheelbarrow.
But it would be
More than
think-
well.
the problem is that there is no clear definition or clear quantity that you can put in there, because then if you say more than a yard of material.
Right, and maybe it's fine the way it is. I'm just pointing that out, that it's up for interpretation, which we're trying to avoid is the point of these definitions. And I had bulk materials highlighted in. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think that those are conversations for another time, because, like they said, this has to go to P&Z, and then it has to come before us on that one particular issue. Our code is something that is so much more larger and broader, the issues that are with it. And personally, I think that we can help with that. But I think that we should send it over to P&Z, the one piece of it, see what they do, because they're probably going to change everything anyway. And then move forward to there. We got to take little pieces at a time.
No, I agree. And all I'm saying is that if there's a couple things we need to discuss now before we send it to them, so they have a little direction. Otherwise, we get back, we're gonna have the same discussion. So that's I can point out now, or I can point out when it comes back from P&Z. I'd rather them be who were focused on, hey, this was highlighted as an issue. Let's talk about this. Otherwise, they might glance through it and sounds okay, and then I got to ask the question again when it comes back to council. So, and that's the only thing I'm saying on bulk materials. If I can finish that. So, outdoor storage yard and lot says bulk materials, but it also you have a bulk storage yard, which is for the storage of raw materials or bulk goods. So, I don't know if they need to meddle those together or make one exclusive. That's just observation.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything on that?
One other thing I noticed, we have this zoning called Waterfront Commercial Zoning District C2. predominantly pertains to the WOD. However, there are C2 outside of the WOD. So is that something that we've not defined?
C2 is a waterfront zoning.
But
Waterfront overlay.
there's other zoning called C2 that's not in the waterfront district.
Well, the WOD is a special area
Right.
that has C2 and C3.
C2, C3. Yeah. And
And
Yeah.
C2 you can have C2 outside of that area.
Like a marina.
right. But what if you have a C2 outside of the waterfront overlay district?
Then you go by the C2 zoning rules.
Then you go by this rule.
Whatever's in C2.
Even though it says the purpose is to attract and designate those uses for services appropriate, directly related to marine and water-oriented activities. Well, if it's across town and it's not on the water, is this a conflict? I don't know. I just think we have C2 in our area that
It shouldn't be C2.
no, yeah, maybe that's the case too. Maybe it shouldn't be C2. If C2 is only going to be there, then if there's C2 in other areas, on like for example on 19, there's three properties I found that are C2, and there's C3 all around it. So maybe those are misclassified. I don't know. I'm just
According to our zoning code, or was that based upon what the counties?
I'm looking at the county records. So if the county records aren't what I should be looking at,
Yeah.
I don't know. Where do
I think there is some issue with that.
Yeah. Well,
in fact, do you guys realize we actually have 2 airports in this city? Zoned as airports.
I don't see any.
Sunset Marina and America Marina are zoned as airports.
I think those are topics for another discussion.
I don't disagree, but I'm going to get to the bottom of it.
You do that, Dave. We know
So,
you will.
We're confident of that.
Is there
Dave.
any other questions on
Because
the,
I'd like to book a flight.
is there any other questions?
No.
I need a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Our workshop.